In his past life, during the battle that took his life, Damien lost all his comrades on that battlefield. While strolling the field battered and bloodied, he cursed under his breath and complained that it was a reckless operation. He knew it was a death sentence because their unit of barely 100 men had to go up against a force of over 2,000. Back then, Damien was a centurion of the Baroque kingdom's punitive force. He screamed in agony as he watched his comrades die on him, and Damien wished he could have done more. Even though the operation succeeded, the team was annihilated, and Damien blamed himself and wished he were just a little stronger to protect everyone. However, he failed them, and he couldn't even save his own life as he collapsed there on the battlefield, knowing his time was up. As Damien's life flashed before his eyes, several thoughts flashed through his mind, especially all the regrets of his life. Damien wished he had joined the army earlier than at 25, then maybe things would have been different. As the regret continued to eat deep into him, Damien gritted his teeth and yearned for one more chance to do it all over. If only it were possible, he could have started on time and dominated the battlefield along with his comrades. But now he was dying with no miracle in sight. At least that was what he thought during his last moments, but life had other plans for him, and his earnest wish somehow came true. Waking up from dreaming about his past life, Damien frantically runs his hand through his face to make sure it wasn't some wild dream. Thankfully, he confirms that it wasn't a dream, and he had traveled back 17 years before everything began. Damien quietly checks his hands, and then his lower abdomen, where his mana core is located. The mana core is the most important element for warriors training in mana, but in his past life, Damien's mana core was destroyed. However, it is different this time, and Damien is relieved when he sees that everything is intact down there so he can learn how to use mana. In the previous life, after Parker scammed him out of the insurance money, Damien was kicked out and had to struggle doing odd jobs and chores in the back alley. As an orphan abandoned by his guardian, he even took the fall for the crimes of a higher-up in a back alley gang and ended up in prison. Then, in prison, Damien was forcibly conscripted into the army and dragged off to the battlefield. Damien thought that would be the end of his life as he ended up becoming a centurion, but never would he have dreamed of getting reborn before his life went up in flames. Relieved, Damien slumps back to his bed, heaving a sigh of relief that everything worked out in the end. But the good thing is that all the time and skills he honed during his time in the army were about to save his life as Damien suddenly senses movement outside his door. He immediately springs to his feet and pulls out a dagger from under his pillow. As soon as the intruder opened the door, Damien leaped forward with his dagger to attack them, taking them by surprise. Before they can react, he plunges the dagger into the thigh of one of the intruders before pulling it out swiftly. However, Damien is a little disappointed that only half the dagger went into the thigh, but it was enough to leave the enemy writhing in pain on the ground. Meanwhile, the second intruder throws curses at Damien and charges forward to attack him, but Damien effortlessly dodges the strike. The guy tries to attack again, but Damien suddenly takes a step forward and stabs the assassin in his upper thigh. Damien then swiftly pulls out the dagger and with a terrifying killing intent, stares down at the intruders, asking who sent them. As the intruders are writhing in pain, Damien grabs one of them, demanding to know whether his Uncle Parker sent them. But when the dude refuses to respond, Damien stabs him in the thigh again, furiously asking the same questions. Before he can get a response, another dude, who looks like their boss, waltzes into the room and remarks how terrifying Damien looks. Damien immediately recognizes the blonde as a scumbag from his previous life named Mukman. When Damien calls his name, Mukman is surprised and wonders whether he has already introduced himself. Seeing Mukman involved in this operation, a sudden realization hits Damien as he instantly slays the assassin he was questioning earlier. He then grins as he figures that everything that happened to him in his past life must have been directed by his uncle through Mukman. Back then, after Damien was thrown out, he quickly ran to the back alleys for shelter, but Damien found it quite strange that he was suddenly grabbed by some thugs. Thinking back now, it made sense that everything was orchestrated by Parker just to seize Damien's inheritance. Enraged by this realization, Damien murks the second assassin and with a bloodshot expression declares that Parker really sold him out. Despite the terrifying look on Damien's face, Mukman remains unfazed and immediately charges forward to finish him. However, Damien dodges the attack, leaving Mukman stunned and Damien amused as he wonders whether Mukman was always such weak trash. Refusing to lose to a kid, Mukman continues to attack, but Damien swiftly dodges every single one of them. What Mukman doesn't know is that Damien has a special ability he acquired after getting beaten thousands of times and surviving life-threatening moments hundreds of times. Thanks to all these, Damien somehow developed the ability to see his opponent's movements. The moment the opponent tries to attack him, Damien can tell from their gaze, the direction they step on, the degree their waist twists, and the movement of their shoulders, all of which clearly show him where they're going to attack. As Mukman charges towards him again, Damien's ability has already mapped out that Mukman was going to stab him in the head. Thanks to this, Damien swiftly dodges the attack, leaving Mukman surprised and infuriated at the same time. Refusing to be bested by a brat, Mukman erratically attacks, but his movements are too obvious as Damien dodges them effortlessly. Before Mukman can react again, Damien strikes his wrist, causing him to drop his blade. Mukman tries to reach for his blade while Damien pulls out his dagger from Mukman's wrist. Mukman curses Damien under his breath, but before he can pick up the sword, Damien somehow stabs him in the abdomen without any warning. Shocked and confused, Mukman drops to the ground as he tries to make sense of the whole situation. However, no matter how he looks at it, he's unable to understand how a mere brat defeated him just like that. Without hesitation, Damien pulls out the dagger, leaving Mukman almost in tears as he wonders how a 13-year-old dodged his ultimate moves and even stabbed him so easily. Sensing the curiosity in Mukman's expression, Damien decides to put him out of his misery and explain how he was defeated. Damien proudly revealed that he could see exactly where Mukman was going to attack, so he could predict the next movement the moment Mukman raised his arm. Mukman is shocked to hear this and finds it hard to believe such an absurd thing. After all, at this point in Damien's rebirth, mana manipulation hasn't become a novel thing. Since Mukman doesn't believe him, Damien lets him know that he doesn't care. But instead of pleading for his pathetic life, Mukman tells Damien that this is not his end. He grits his teeth, threatening that his guys will come for revenge when the rumors of his capture spread. However, Damien reminds him that he's about to die here, so no one will spread any rumors. With a blade to Mukman's throat, Damien warns him to be smart and reveal whether Parker contracted them to take him out. But Mukman remains quiet, refusing to talk, so Damien threatens to cripple him and make him live the rest of his life limping. Seeing the terrifying expression on Damien's face, Mukman can't help but wonder how a 13-year-old could look so empty and cold-blooded. Terrified, Mukman quickly reveals that Parker contracted them to take Damien alive. But the moment this confession leaves Mukman's mouth, Damien's blade swiftly ends him, leaving Mukman in shock as his life flashes before his eyes. After eliminating the last intruder, Damien decides to clean house before embarking on his quest to conquer the world. One of the few lessons he carried over from his previous life was the importance of avoiding unnecessary enemies. However, if circumstances forced him to make one, he believed in crushing them completely before they had the chance to return and become a threat in the future. Elsewhere, Parker and another lackey named Montal are anxiously checking the time while waiting for Mukman to bring Damien. Parker feels uneasy, but Montal reassures him that the job will be done and Damien will be brought over. He then mentions that Parker must have been very angry to contract him just to capture a little brat. Recalling how he was humiliated, Parker responded by slamming his fist on the table while nursing his ripe cheek fillers from Damien's punch. Thinking about how he was shamed by a kid, Parker buries his head while Montal consoles him, telling him to wait a bit longer. He also warns Parker not to withhold his payment just because the package is arriving late. Just then, they sense someone at the door, and Montal heads over to check, thinking it must be their guys arriving with Damien in a body bag. Parker is excited as he thinks about tearing Damien apart and keeping him barely alive because of the insurance contract. He then angrily vows that he'll completely erase Damien once the insurance contract is resolved. Meanwhile, Montal slightly opens the door while trying to scold his guys for being late, but the next moment, a dagger flies through the crack, almost stabbing him. Montal manages to evade the attack, quickly concluding that the assassins must have failed. Behind him, Parker is spooked, visibly unsettled by the sudden turn of events, and at that moment, Damien strolls into the room like a confident predator, while Montal demands to know if he's Damien. Damien confidently answers that he is and immediately brands Montal a lackey. Montal is momentarily confused by the sudden nickname until Damien explains that he is merely Parker's errand boy, obediently carrying out whatever orders he is given. The explanation only makes Montal laugh, after which he calls out to Parker and demands triple the commission they originally agreed upon. Parker is stunned by the sudden demand, but Montal quickly explains that his team has suffered heavy losses, making the job far more costly than expected. He then points to the blood staining the tip of Damien's spear and notes that an unexpected variable has entered the equation. After all, it is no ordinary feat for a team of 3 to be wiped out so easily by one brat. Despite Montal's explanation, Parker tries to protest the sudden increase in payment, so Montal sheaths his sword, instantly quitting the job, but Parker stops him. After observing Damien and seeing how absolutely terrifying he looks, Parker hurriedly agrees to pay 3 times as much. Left alone with a monster like Damien, Parker fears he might not make it out alive. Montal, on the other hand, is excited after a successful negotiation, so he prepares to deliver Damien as promised. He first tells Damien that he doesn't care about his dead teammates since it was just a business deal between them, so he has no feelings about their deaths. However, Damien sternly lets Montal know that it's not just another payday for him. What they don't know is that for Damien, this is revenge for all the suffering he endured at their hands in the back alley after being thrown out by his uncle. Because of their collusion, Damien spent half his previous life rotting in the back alleys like unwanted trash. And to make matters worse, his mana core was destroyed during this time, so there's no way he's letting any one of them go scot-free in this life. Determined to get his revenge, Damien tells Montal not to ask questions and just die. However, Montal calls him an arrogant brat as he charges forward, confident he can handle a little problem like Damien. But before he can even land the strike, Damien almost punctures the dude's generation, but Montal dodges the attack because he already realized that Damien was aiming for his legs. Damien is also impressed with Montal's skills and notes that the dude isn't some ordinary trash like the other intruders from earlier. Nevertheless, the duo continues to fight, but at some point Montal plans to sneak an attack on Damien. He pretends to punch Damien in the face, but the moment Damien raises his arms to guard his face is the moment Montal plans to stab him in the thigh. Thinking his plan is a sure thing, Montal is already mentally celebrating, but just as Damien dodges the punch, Montal tries to stab him in the thigh as planned. Unexpectedly, Damien swiftly dodges both attacks, leaving Montal stunned that his plan had been uncovered. Before Montal can react, Damien strikes him several times using the stick end of his spear, before confidently revealing that he knew Montal's plan all along. At this point, Montal is infuriated as he angrily hurls curses at Damien. He's just about to vow to kill him when a sudden slash in the throat cuts his villain declaration mid-sentence. As his life flashes before his eyes, Montal clenches his throat, gasping for breath. Unfortunately, it's too late as he slumps to the ground dead. Looking at the dead dude, Damien notes that he's stronger than a thug like Mukman, but at the end of the day, he's still just back alley trash. Now that he was done taking out the trash, Damien immediately turned to look at his uncle like a predator. Panicking, Parker hurriedly falls to his knees, trembling and stammering for words to beg Damien. Ignoring his pleas, Damien quietly walks up to finish him while Parker continues to beg for his pathetic life. But sparing his life is not something that Damien set out to do as Parker's screams echo through the night. A few days after settling scores with his enemies, Damien decides to handle the insurance payout. The insurance agent informs him that he'll be receiving a total of 6 platinum and 650 gold. Basically, 1 platinum is supposed to equal 1,000 gold, and the monthly living expenses for a family of 4 are roughly 2 to 3 gold. Therefore, what Damien got from the payout could probably help him live comfortably throughout his lifetime. After settling the accounts, the insurance dude, who is now terrified of Damien, thanks Damien for trusting him. Just as Damien is about to leave, the man hesitantly calls out to him and asks where he is headed. He explains that he noticed Damien arriving in a carriage loaded for what appears to be a long journey and cannot help but grow curious about his destination. When Damien replies that he's planning to enlist in the army, the agent is surprised to hear this. And Damien says it's because there are some people he's looking forward to meeting. Soon afterward, Damien sets out on his journey to enlist in the army, and even though it's to meet his comrades, Damien is doing this because the army is the only place for him. Besides, according to what he recalls from his past life, this world is about to plunge into chaos in 5 years. By then, most young men will have no choice but to be forcefully conscripted into the military because an era of war is approaching, and no one will be able to escape it. Now that he has been given a second chance and his mana hole is intact, Damien is excited to be volunteering while he's still young, instead of enlisting late like in his previous life. He plans to first head to the capital and train there for a week using the Delft mana cultivation method before applying to the 3rd training camp. This time, Damien is determined to carve his own path and rule this era instead of getting swept along like a clueless lad. 1 week later, Damien has finally made his way to the enlistment grounds, and during training, he draws attention from other enrollees. Everyone wonders how a kid like him is that skilled, but Damien ignores the buzz and focuses on his training. After training, he spots a few injuries on his palm from wielding the spear and contemplates wrapping his hand with bandages. Damien notes that his body is still far too weak, and his hands are nothing like the ones from his past life that were covered in calluses. Just then, an instructor interrupts Damien's thoughts, asking whether he came to apply as a trainee. Damien answers that he did, and the instructor compliments his spear technique. He then asks where Damien learnt it from, but Damien hesitates to answer as he wonders whether the dude recognizes it as the kingdom's greatest spear art. This so-called spear art may have an absurd name, but it's the spear style most commonly used by the kingdom's soldiers. After contemplating for a while, Damien lets the instructor know that he learned it from his late father. The instructor immediately feels guilty for dredging up some unpleasant memories, so he apologizes to Damien. But Damien enthusiastically brushes it off as he goes on to explain how proud he is that his father served in the military. He also adds that he's simply following in his father's footsteps to enlist in the army. Moved by his speech, the instructor instantly falls for Damien, who is not just dedicated and talented, but also a legacy kid. Without knowing it, the instructor almost gives Damien a straight entry into the camp, but as soon as he realizes what he has done, the dude quickly retracts his statement. After regaining his composure, he asks for Damien's name, and Damien replies like a soldier. Soon afterwards, the instructor turns to leave and wishes Damien the best of luck on his trial. Damien then thanks him, and after the instructor leaves, Damien begins to feel a sudden surge of mana in his core. Recognizing what it is, Damien is over the moon that he can finally use mana, the one thing he failed to activate in his previous life. The mana cultivation method Damien was using is called the Delft Mana Cultivation Method, and it was developed 15 years in the future by a genius of the Delft family. Though this method is strict and demanding, it was famous for being the most efficient mana cultivation method. Damien knew this because back in his previous life, he studied every book on mana cultivation, even though his mana core was completely destroyed. He still memorized the cultivation method, desperately hoping to find a way to cultivate without his mana core. However, he couldn't find any, and his comrades used to laugh at him because he studied cultivation methods even though he couldn't handle mana. Damien was always pissed because of this, but looking back now, all that teasing has finally paid off. Since one of his goals has been fulfilled, Damien decides to focus on the trial ahead and pass the enlistment exam. He then scans around for a familiar face from his previous life, who was also from the 3rd training camp. However, Damien's search doesn't yield results as he doesn't know what the person looks like at this time. Soon afterward, the enrollees were assembled, and their first test was to lift a boulder. The test is considered simple, but lifting a boulder over your head weighing over 30 kg is no easy feat. However, it was the perfect test for weeding out overambitious rookies, and Damien is not one of them as he breezes through the first test with a little sweat. This might be tougher for others, but not for Damien, thanks to the fact that he has achieved 1-star mana. After the first test, an instructor announces that the second test is a long-distance race. He explains that they have 1 hour and 30 minutes to finish the race course. According to the rules, they are allowed to bump shoulders or have minor collisions with other applicants while running. However, he warns that applicants are strictly prohibited from attacking each other. Damien immediately realizes that this rule is probably because a few instructors are mixed into the crowd to spice things up. The instructor then continues to read the rules, informing them that those who step off the designated track will be disqualified. After hearing the rules, Damien is amused as he looks forward to an interesting test. A few minutes later, Damien is warming up for the race when some blonde dude acts all chummy with him. Damien is quite confused since he doesn't recall befriending anyone since his rebirth, but the blonde dude lets Damien know that he has been watching him for a while now. Damien is confused and wonders why the dude was keeping an eye on him. Just then, he realizes that the blonde dude seems familiar, but while he's still trying to place the face, the dude shoves his face too close to Damien, asking whether Damien has no idea why he's curious about him. Seeing Damien still lost, the blonde dude suddenly whispers into his ear, revealing that he knows about Damien's use of mana. Damien is taken aback by this revelation, but he tries to remain calm, because no rule prohibits commoners from learning how to use mana. However, in cases where a commoner uses mana, it's mostly because they're backed by prominent families or they have some kind of special background. Just then, it finally hits Damien where he has seen this dude's face, but just to be sure, Damien asks the dude for his name. The moment the blonde introduces himself as Apple, Damien is stunned that such a legendary figure started here. Apparently, in Damien's previous life, Apple was a legend among legends who became a powerful general. Apple even received the title of Count at the young age of 30. Basically, he was the ultimate success story among commoners, so everyone looked up to him as the yardstick for success. While Damien is still trying to figure out how to deal with Apple's revelation, Apple suddenly offers him an olive branch. Since they're both around the same age, Apple reaches out to work in harmony with Damien, and Damien accepts the handshake. After all, he considers that there's no harm in allying with a future powerful general since Apple is the one reaching out first. Several minutes later, the instructor tells everyone to get ready for the race, and as soon as he gives the signal, the applicants immediately set off. Damien notes that quite a few of them start strong right out of the gate, but suddenly, a line of huge dudes blocks off the applicants at the back, leaving everyone confused. One dude explains that the line is called the Wall of Wailing, and breaking through that wall is the real test. Hearing this, Apple suggests simply tagging along and then overtaking the huge dudes at the very end of the race. Damien says it's a good strategy, but since it doesn't resonate with his current style, he instantly takes off at the speed of light, leaving Apple stunned. Some other applicants are taking their sweet time in the race, and one of them suggests the same strategy as Apple. His friends all agree with his idea, but the next moment, one of them notices Damien from behind heading towards them like a frigging shooting star. Just as the blonde dude is wondering what type of crazy person is running that fast, another guy notices Damien and is ready to knock him down a few notches. But the blonde dude warns him not to hurt Damien and just crushes his hopes a little by giving him a wake-up call. The other dude is excited about this and can't wait for Damien to test his steel-plated shoulder muscles. However, he promises to go gentle on him. But before he can finish that sentence, Damien effortlessly pulls the hunk out of the way like paper, instantly breaking the wall. The hunk is stunned, speechless, while Damien easily zooms off, leaving them behind, panicking. Some of them soon begin to chase after him, confirming Damien's suspicions that skilled instructors have been mixed into the applicants. However, Damien is not worried in the slightest since they're just training camp instructors, and he doesn't even rate them. Meanwhile, behind them, the normal applicants are still struggling to keep up, except for Apple, who is fired up by Damien and decides to follow in his footsteps. Apple immediately darts off, leaving the other applicants in shock, but this gives them a sudden pump of adrenaline to push forward instead of their initial plan to follow behind until the last minute. Meanwhile, in front, the instructors are surprised to see another fast monster heading towards them. In the audience, other instructors are also watching the whole bizarre turn of events, and one of them notes that the vibe on the training ground has slightly shifted. One of the instructors suggests deploying more instructors to make things harder, but a voice tells them to back off. It turns out to be Instructor Rayman, the same dude who approached Damien and almost gave him a pass before the training started. Rayman tells them it's not a good idea to send in more instructors, or everyone might discover that the exam is rigged. He adds that the applicants defeating the instructors is given since it's part of their skill. Rayman then watches the match like a proud dad as Damien zooms past, and he notes that he wasn't wrong about Damien. He's also impressed that Damien's action somehow caused a ripple effect, causing the other applicants to be fired up. Rayman notes that Damien is like a leader on the battlefield who knows how to light a spark in others. Soon afterward, Damien gasps for air as he completes the 29th lap and begins the last lap towards the finish line. Just then, Apple catches up to him and Damien remarks that the dude is still full of energy. Apple then asks whether Damien planned this running strategy because he knows that they would be out of juice like the others if they couldn't use mana. Damien says he never planned anything, but when one has a card, it's best to use it. Apple finds this reasoning quite intriguing and lets Damien know that he's an interesting guy. Damien also returns the compliment, and as he steps on the finish line, followed by Apple, the instructor immediately informs them that they have passed the second test. Meanwhile, a top official has heard about an interesting applicant entering the third camp. An instructor tells him that Rayman already contacted him about it, and he reveals that Damien is only 13 years old. The top official is surprised to hear that Rayman actually finds someone interesting since he's usually hard to please, but this also makes him curious about Damien's identity, so he asks the instructor for Damien's name. Back in the training camp, the results of the test are released, and while others wail about failing, some others celebrate their success. However, Damien is not the least bit excited, and he's even puzzled seeing people celebrate such a small feat. Knowing the era of chaos is coming in a few years, Damien doesn't see any need to celebrate getting enlisted. During the war in his previous life, conscription into the army was compulsory, and everyone fought so hard just to avoid it. Thinking about it now, Damien notes that the world is still at peace. Just then, Apple calls out to Damien and congratulates him on making it into training camp. Damien acts as if he's surprised that Apple passed the test, and Apple reveals that he saw Damien's name at the very top of the list. Damien claims he just noticed it, and Apple mentions that he looks forward to working with Damien even though they don't end up in the same unit. Since they have a week until proper enlistment, Apple asks what Damien plans to do with his free time. Damien casually replies that he has a few things to take care of, so he might be quite busy. When Apple asks for specifics, Damien brushes it off, saying he needs to gather supplies. Hearing this, Apple instantly remembers a very crucial supply for enlistment and advises Damien to get it. Apparently, the Army issues rock-hard combat boots, so trainees are advised to buy soul and heal pads. Damien pretends that this is news to him, but he already knows the pain of the military boot from his previous life. Still, he thanks Apple for the advice, making Apple feel very useful and appreciated. Damien then asks Apple about his plans before enlistment, and Apple claims he has a lot to do, but he brushes it off quickly as if he doesn't want to be asked for the specifics. Damien reads the room and bids Apple farewell and heads off to prepare for enlistment while Apple quietly watches him leave. A few minutes later, an old dude named Alan arrives, asking Apple about Damien's identity. As Apple considers how to respond, he recalls his conversation with Damien during the match when Apple asked why Damien wanted to enlist. With the amount of mana Damien could wield, Apple knew the guy wasn't some ordinary dude. Damien playfully considered this bragging because for Apple to be able to see his mana level, it meant that he was also not an ordinary guy. To respond to Apple's question, Damien said he enlisted because the army is the only place for him. Thinking back now, Apple feels that Damien has more reasons he can't easily share with others. To respond to Alan's question about Damien's identity, Apple simply says he's a guy they'll be seeing for a long time. However, Alan doesn't understand what he means, so Apple simply brushes it off. As they prepare to leave, Alan calls Apple a young master, telling him that his carriage awaits. But Apple reminds Alan not to address him as a young master in public. Alan quickly apologizes as the duo heads out towards their carriage. Elsewhere, Damien strolls the bustling streets of the capital and notes that it's quite different from how he remembers it from his past life. Everything was still at peace, and people had food to eat, but the capital Damien remembers was bleak and riddled with hunger. In 5 years, this lively atmosphere will completely change, so Damien makes up his mind to prepare for the upcoming chaotic era. To do that, his first plan is to locate the Work Merchant Guild, a future powerhouse during the war era in his previous life. Damien notes that once war begins, artifacts, weapons, and rations will become the most valuable commodities, so naturally, the merchant guilds will play a critical role. In the previous life, the wealthiest merchant guild on the continent was the Work Merchant Guild. Back then, during the war, Damien and his comrades always looked forward to their relief supplies. On one of such days when the Work Merchant Guild brought their usual supplies, some of the soldiers were jealous and complained bitterly that the merchants were enjoying while the soldiers suffered on the battlefield. But Damien reminded them that they'd be dead without the Merchant Guild supplying them with food and weapons. The grumbling soldier claimed he understood, but admitted that he was complaining because he was just bitter and jealous. Damien, on the other hand, was grateful to the Work Merchant Guild, knowing that it couldn't be easy for them to consistently fund charity work with their money. He then instructs the soldiers to head to the caravan for their supplies while he stays behind watching them from a distance. One of the soldiers then calls Damien's attention to the guildmaster of the Work Guild, but Damien couldn't see the guildmaster properly because he was wearing a white cloak. However, he saw a bit of the blonde dude's features, and back then his men said the guildmaster looked like an arrogant brat. Back in the present, Damien tries to figure out how to locate the guild since right now, they're not popular. However, from what he knows, Damien recalls that the guild started doing charity work even before the war started. Since there are 40 merchant guilds in the capital, Damien decides to narrow it down, leaving 7. Out of the 7, he notes that he only needs to check the ones with a decent amount of capital since they can afford to do charity work. Unfortunately, after a whole day of searching, Damien comes up empty-handed, but still decides to check the last one on his list, Hamel Guild. Upon entering the guild, a man greets him, and Damien pays his respects quietly, hoping this is the one he's searching for. Damien then tells the man that he wants to discuss an investment to support their charity work. The dude is excited to hear this and immediately invites Damien to sit while praising him for having such a noble mind at his age. Though skeptical about the Hamel Guild being the future Work Guild, Damien decides to humor the guy, hoping this one isn't a bust like the others. But the next moment, Damien's eyes light up when the man introduces himself as Work, the guildmaster of the Hamel Merchant Guild. Damien then introduces himself, and Work invites him to sit and continue their chat about the investment. However, Damien apologizes before asking whether Work has a son. Work chuckles at the strange question, after which he tells Damien that he only has one daughter. Damien is instantly disappointed to hear this because the future guildmaster of the Work Guild is supposed to be a boy. However, his disappointment vanishes the moment Work's daughter, Deal, steps into the room. Damien immediately realizes that she looks like the man in the white cloak from his previous life, but because of the gender, he's still a bit skeptical. After Deal arrives, Work introduces Damien to her, explaining that he wants to invest in their charity project. Deal cheerfully greets Damien and questions him again about the investment just to make sure what she heard from her father is true. Damien then confirms it, after which he tries to figure out whether Deal is really the same person in a white cloak from his previous life. He notes that apart from her gender, everything else checks out, including the resemblance and the age. Damien recalls that what made the master of the guild stand out then was his beauty, so he can't help but wonder whether it was because the guildmaster was a woman. He also can't figure out how Deal ended up succeeding her father under the name Work. Deal then asks Damien how much he plans to invest and explains that the amount depends on how they utilize the funds. Damien then reveals that he plans to invest 300 gold for a start, and invest more depending on how things progress. Deal and Work are shocked to hear that Damien is investing such a huge sum. After a brief moment of silence, Work asks about Damien's requirement for the investment since it is not a donation. Damien then breaks it down, explaining that he wants to acquire a portion of Hamel Merchant Guild shares, and in exchange for the investment, he'd like a share of the profits. Work is taken aback to hear such a bold investment plan coming from such a young boy. He also can't help but question the source of Damien's funds, so he decides to carefully ask him about it. Damien reassures Work that his funds are clean and explains that he simply wants to use his late parents' inheritance for a good cause. Hearing this, Work feels bad for prying and quickly apologizes for his rudeness, but Damien assures him that he doesn't mind. Work then announces that he needs to hold a group meeting regarding the guild, so he asks Damien to give him some time. Damien agrees to the request, and after he leaves, Work cannot stop thinking about him. When Deal asks about it, Work explains that he was fascinated with Damien's attitude. Even though Damien is only 13, Work believes that he's no ordinary boy, especially from the deep look in his eyes. He then wishes that Damien were 5 years older, so that he would be a perfect match for Deal. Embarrassed, Deal yells at him to quit the matchmaker gig, but Work continues to tease her, wondering if she's into older guys. After Damien's deal with the Hamel Merchant Guild, time flew by, and it was soon the day of enlistment. Standing in front of the enlistment camp, Damien felt a sense of relief, as this felt like the day he truly started afresh. His past life may have vanished in vain, but Damien promises himself that this life will be different. Firmly clenching his fist, he vows to be the one who devours the Empire and not the other way around. A few moments later, Damien makes his way to the first platoon of the 3rd training camp, where he has been assigned. He quickly scans the room but doesn't recognize any familiar faces, making him wonder whether Apple was assigned to a different platoon. Damien is a bit disappointed because he was hoping to be in the same unit as Apple since they're the same age. A few minutes later, an instructor arrives, cheerfully greeting the recruits. He then introduces himself as Brian and reveals that he will be their platoon leader for the next month. Brian then announces that he will be inspecting everyone's personal belongings and explains that food, drinks, and luxury goods are banned. He firmly orders those with alcohol and cigarettes to turn themselves in immediately, as those caught hiding these contrabands will be punished. Just then, Damien notices 2 guys fidgeting in the corner, and one of them quietly laments that he quit smoking but forgot to leave the cigarettes behind. The other dude tells his friend that a shopkeeper told him that alcohol is not banned. Irritated, Damien silently hurls insults at them for being dumb enough to make it so obvious that they're hiding something. Brian then orders everyone to take out all their belongings and he begins the search from Damien's corner. After scanning through Damien's belongings, he announces that Damien is free, but looking closely, Brian asks how old he is since he looks too young. Damien then answers that he's 13, leaving everyone stunned. Some muscle-headed dude named Kyle immediately jumps on the opportunity to mock Damien for joining the army. His friend also remarks that Damien is just looking for a free lunch for life. Damien soon overhears and glares at them for talking trash to his face, but when Kyle sees him glaring, he tries to start trouble. However, Damien brushes him off since there's no need to stoop to his level. Still, he decides to remember Kyle's face and glares at him again, but this time with an overwhelming killing intent. At that moment, Damien makes up his mind to beat the dude into submission someday and make sure to let him know that a kid did it. As the atmosphere becomes extremely tense, some bald cannon fodder shudders, suddenly getting goosebumps. Just then, Brian tells him to take out his belongings, and the bald dude brings out a few rags, claiming it's everything he brought with him. But the next moment, Brian whispers into his ear, sternly asking whether he needs to be searched. Terrified, the bald dude hurriedly scrambles to bring out all the contraband he thought he had hidden so cleverly. Brian then repeats his warning, telling them that those who are caught hiding contraband will be punished by running through the training yard all night. Hearing this, the recruits begin to tremble, and as Brian yells for them to take out whatever they were hiding, a dozen of them scramble to comply, except for Damien, the model recruit of the century. Once the inspection is over, Brian announces that it is time to select a cadet platoon leader to represent him whenever he's not present. He then pulls out a list to choose the soldier who entered the camp with excellent scores. After scanning through the list, Brian calls out Damien's name and asks the recruits who Damien is. At first, no one responds, so Brian figures it might be Kyle since he looks more capable than the others. However, he notes that Kyle's character is trash, and a cadet platoon leader needs character as much as skill. Nevertheless, Brian walks up to him, asking if he's Damien, but before Kyle can respond, Damien answers behind them. Brian is a bit surprised that the best recruit is not the musclehead, so he turns around, curious to see who. But when he realizes who Damien is, Brian is absolutely shocked, so he quickly checks the list to make sure he didn't mispronounce the name. As he scans the list, Brian asks Damien about his age, and Damien confirms that he's 13 years old. Before Brian can make sense of how a 13-year-old scored higher than everyone, Kyle chimes in with his unsolicited comment, looking down on Damien. As if irritated by trash, Kyle remarks that a brat like Damien cannot be their cadet platoon leader. He also mentions that the military is not a place for playdates, but Brian immediately shuts him up. However, Kyle refuses to back down or respect authority as he walks closer to them, explaining that for a cadet platoon leader, image is important since they represent the platoon leader. He then points to Damien's face, saying that the platoon's discipline will crumble if a brat like him becomes the cadet platoon leader. All the while the argument was going on, Damien stayed out of it because he didn't care for the post as he considered it a hassle. But this muscle-headed avatar just had to talk trash about him, awakening Damien's competitiveness. Grinning wickedly, Damien immediately makes up his mind to teach the dude a lesson. Damien then mocks the dude, confidently saying he would do a better job compared to a moron like Kyle, whose brain is filled with nothing but air and muscles. Kyle is infuriated by this savage roast, which almost causes him emotional damage. To make matters worse, for Kyle, Brian cuts him off like garbage and grabs his shoulder, sternly warning him never to call his fellow members insulting names. Loudmouthed Kyle, who couldn't shut up a few seconds ago, trembles like a wet puppy under Brian's terrifying gaze as Brian gives him a stern warning. After the warning, Kyle confirms that he understood, but Brian turns to face Damien, telling him that Kyle's words do carry some weight. Brian then explains that a cadet platoon leader needs to also look the part, befitting the authority given to them. Kyle then raises his hand to make a suggestion, but he's about to call Damien a brat when he remembers Brian's warning and immediately changes his tone. He then proposes a sparring match between himself and Damien and suggests that the winner becomes the cadet platoon leader, as this would prove both leadership and skills. Brian then asks whether Damien is good with this arrangement, and Damien accepts without hesitation. Since the situation has gotten to this, he plans to put these pompous airheads in their place to straighten the discipline of the whole platoon. As if provoking Kyle, Damien confidently declares that all he has to do is crush all that lump of muscle. Kyle is infuriated to hear this, but before he can react, Brian yells at the others, asking if they're on board with this bet. The trainees all chime in that they agree with it, so Brian orders everyone to follow him to the sparring arena. The trainees file out behind Brian, and as soon as they arrive, Brian announces that they will begin the match immediately to determine the king of their little jungle. As they prepare to begin, Brian tells Kyle and Damien that the only rule of the match is to stop sparring once the other opponent surrenders. He then asks if they're ready, and once the duo confirms that they're prepared to start, Brian gives them the signal to begin. Instead of starting, Kyle first stretches his muscles while mouthing off about feeling bad for bullying a young lad. Damien simply chuckles as he tells Kyle to stop acting like a drama queen and just come at him like a good old big lump. Enraged by the roasting, Kyle charges towards Damien, still mouthing off, but Damien remains in the same spot with his hand folded behind his back as if watching the lump of muscle approach in slow motion. Nevertheless, Damien admits that Kyle's speed is much better than he thought, and it is at least at a decent level compared to the soldiers in his previous life. Unfortunately, this is not enough to go up against someone like Damien, who is faster than DC's Flash. Unfazed by the attack, Damien effortlessly dodges Kyle's fist, noting that a bag of muscle is no match for him. Kyle is completely shocked that the so-called brat he was supposed to put in his place dodged a punch as if he anticipated it all along. However, he refuses to let this stop him as he prepares to throw another while sarcastically praising Damien for learning a petty, cheap trick. As he closes in on Damien again, Kyle confidently declares that Damien will not be able to dodge the next one. However, Damien also dodges this one, infuriating Kyle, so since his fists seem to be faulty, Kyle decides to try to slam Damien into the ground. He immediately rushes forward, but before Kyle can grab him, Damien vanishes into thin air. Kyle is completely shocked as he wonders what type of circus trick this is, but the next moment, Damien responds behind him. Unfortunately, before he can react, Damien punches him from behind, shattering a few ribs. Kyle writhes in pain, and Damien notes that this punch is hard for anyone to endure since it was a direct hit infused with mana. Despite the powerful punch, Kyle still manages to stay conscious, and Damien is quite surprised as he notes that muscle is tougher than he seems. Refusing to be beaten down by a brat, Kyle vows to kill Damien as he angrily charges forward again, determined to have the last laugh. Unfortunately, this dude messed with the wrong guy, so Damien decides to quickly end his misery with yet another mana-infused punch to the abdomen. Kyle screams in pain as he crashes to the ground while Damien dusts his hands, remarking that the big lump is finished. After dusting off his hands, he sternly turns to the other pompous brats who were looking down on him a few minutes ago and sternly asks if anyone else wants to challenge him. But the trainees are too terrified to respond and can only shake their heads, so Brian announces that the match is over and declares that Damien is the winner. He then confirms that Damien is now the official cadet platoon leader. Soon afterward, Kyle leaves the infirmary after having passed out in the sparring ground earlier. He heads back to the trainees' room in shame and can't believe he had to be carried to the infirmary. Kyle tries to recall what happened during the match, and it is revealed that he has no memory of what happened after the first punch from Damien. It seems that a stroke fried his brain cells, and he passed out while his body continued acting on its own. He soon stops outside the trainee dorms, unable to face the walk of shame because he walked into the trainee camp thinking no one here would be his match. Kyle struggles to understand how he lost in such a humiliating way. After standing outside the door for a while, he walks into the room, hanging his head in shame as everyone turns to stare at him. The tension in the room rises further as Kyle begins to walk towards Damien's bed, leaving everyone panicking. They whisper among themselves, wondering how to stop him before he ends up in the infirmary a second time. But the moment the usually rude Kyle calmly calls Damien's name, it becomes clear that he didn't come to cause trouble this time. He then falls to his knees and bows in defeat, accepting his large L like a true king. Kyle even goes as far as offering to serve Damien as his leader, leaving even Damien in utter shock. Confused, Damien wonders what happened to the proud lump of muscle from before, and even considers that he may have fried Kyle's brain without realizing it. But Kyle explains that his brain cells are fine, and it is only natural to pay respects to the strongest warrior. He then says that Damien is not just the youngest person he has ever fought, but the strongest one. Damien is surprised when Kyle begs to serve him as his leader, and Damien is impressed that Kyle has manners and isn't some thug, as he thought. Damien then gestures for him to rise, telling him that there's no need for using titles like leader. He tells Kyle to call him by his name and reaches out to him, offering him friendship. Kyle happily accepts Damien's hand as he looks forward to their time together. A week after their enlistment into the army, time flew by quickly, and Brian continued to grill Damien's platoon hard. The high-intensity training made it feel like time in the camp was passing quickly, but it was not. After another intense training, Brian orders the trainees to return to their dorms except for Damien, whom he tells to follow him. Damien quietly follows him while wondering where they were going and what Brian was planning. A few minutes later, they arrive at the administrative office, and Damien wonders whether there's some important announcement. Upon entering, he finds the room filled with other cadet platoon leaders, so he immediately relaxes and decides to wait patiently for the announcement. Damien is just minding his business when some random dude starts teasing him for being so young. Damien quietly observes the guy and notes that he looks so much like a praying mantis because of his skinny body. Damien then compares him to Kyle and imagines that it would be a hilarious sight if the two of them stood next to each other because of their completely different body types. The dude catches Damien staring and angrily demands to know why, and without hesitation, Damien reveals that he was just wondering how far the dude's eyes can stretch. The dude is emotionally damaged by Damien's roast, but before he can make a comeback, an instructor takes the stage, telling the crowd to shut their trap. Still annoyed, the praying mantis angrily whispers behind Damien, promising to deal with him later. Meanwhile, the instructor then reveals that the reason he called all the platoon leader cadets is because of the upcoming interplatoon group battle. Apparently, the competition is taking place in a week, and it will be used as a very important midterm evaluation for the platoons. The instructor then tells them that all platoon leader cadets must lead their units to properly prepare for the evaluation. After the announcement, he dismisses them and orders them to return to their dorms. On his way out, Damien runs into the mantis dude waiting for him at the door of the office. The dude then raises a fist to teach Damien a lesson for crossing him instead of just taking all the insults directed at him from a so-called superior being. However, before the mantis dude can do anything, another cadet leader stops and scolds the dude for being disrespectful to a fellow cadet's platoon leader. He advises the mantis dude to head back to his platoon instead of causing trouble, but the mantis dude tells him to back off and mind his own business. However, the other dude refuses to leave and reminds mantis dude that who wins and who loses is still up in the air. He then tells Damien to leave with him and ignore the idiot, and Damien agrees, but before leaving, he asks Mantis Dude for his platoon number. Mantis Dude then proudly reveals that he's from the 4th platoon, but just as he's about to mention his name, Damien cuts him like trash and promises to deal with the idiot at the upcoming group battle. On his way back, the nicer dude calls Damien by his name. Leaving Damien wondering how the guy knows his name, the dude happily reveals that he heard all about Damien's talent in the exam from Apple, a member of his platoon. The nice dude then introduces himself as Gerard, the cadet platoon leader of the 3rd platoon, and mentions that he will be looking forward to Damien's skill at the group battle, and Damien welcomes the challenge. A few moments later, Damien arrives at his platoon and calls everyone's attention to pass on the announcement. Once he gets their attention, Damien lets them know about the upcoming interplatoon battle happening in a week. He then declares that their platoon, the 1st platoon, must take first place no matter what. After the declaration, Damien informs them to remember that among the other platoons, they must absolutely crush the 4th platoon, especially the cadet platoon leader, Praying Mantis Dude. With the training session entering the 2nd week, the whole atmosphere around the training ground shifted accordingly. The instructor calls the team together to give them a heads up about the competition. He tells them that from that week forward, they are going to learn formations that are crucial for the competition. And even though it is a team effort, he lets them know that soldiers who perform well individually will receive extra points, so they are all expected to give it their all. The team roars in reaction to what he said, and Damien can clearly see that throwing in extra points was really a good motivator, since everybody wants to get a good score so that they can get easy access to their preferred branch. The instructor informs the trainees that they are going to be learning a particular military formation called the wedge formation, which is an offensive formation designed to break through enemy lines. Basically, the formation is designed like a giant arrow that packs a highly destructive power, but it has a peculiar flaw. If the vanguard collapses, the rear also collapses with it, but if the spearhead is strong, it can unleash an explosive amount of power. For Damien's squad, they are lucky to have Kyle, who is the perfect man for the tip. The instructor tells the platoon to divide itself into 2 groups as they prepare to practice the formation. Damien takes charge of one group while he tells Kyle to take charge of the other. Kyle giggles at Damien, telling him that he has no intention of losing. Once Damien's squad is gathered, he tells them that he has some tips for them concerning the formation, and one of them asks him in surprise if he has done something like this before. Damien uses his regular lie by telling them that his late father, who was a soldier, taught him. Damien then proceeds to hand out the instructions, and his troop admits that it is a really good one, so they are going to give it their all. In preparation, Damien tells the strongest guys in the group to line up behind him while the shorter ones raise their shields to stay on the outer flanks. He tells them that they have to make sure they are holding their shields above their heads. Damien observes the opposition, and he realizes that Kyle's team is heavily focused on defense, but he is not moved by this because he plans to smash right through them. Damien roars at the top of his voice, telling his team that they are going to finish the match in one shot, and just then, the instructor declares the match open. Damien's men immediately move forward, and Damien is surprised to see that his team is actually doing well even though it is their first time. Damien continues urging them forward, and as they are about to reach Kyle's team, Damien aims to use mana, which he has not used previously. Just as their shields clash, Damien reinforces himself with mana and he exerts himself on his opponent while telling his guys to also push harder with him to target the gaps just as they planned. Damien already has a plan in mind, and this is to target the opposition's gaps to cause them to panic. Just as predicted, Damien's team starts to exploit the gaps, and chaos ensues in the opposition's team as they ask themselves questions about who is supposed to block the gaps that have just been invaded. Damien and his men soon find the opening they are looking for, and using their spears, they trip the opposition's bodies, causing them to crash to the ground. Kyle is still yelling at them to get up when Damien closes down on him, forcing the two of them to lock shields. Kyle tries to put up a fight against Damien, but Damien, being Damien, knocks him to the ground. Damien uses this opportunity to give Kyle a lecture, telling him that his strength is incredible and he just has to find a way to use it smartly. Meanwhile, the instructor is watching everything unfold, and he is left speechless at how impressive Damien is. Even though he has a frail body, he looks completely different with the way he moves, and this makes it hard for Kyle to even believe that he is a recruit just like him and the others. With Damien taking the leader of the opposition out, the instructor stops the match, signaling that the victory goes to Damien's team. Damien helps Kyle to get on his feet, but Kyle promises to get him next time. Instead of wallowing in their defeat, Kyle and his squad start asking Damien to reveal his tactics, and they are also curious to know if it is something that they can employ during the competition. Later on, Damien notices that the platoon members are now staying back after the general training during the day to even train themselves more. Damien smiles because he knows that if it continues this way, they might not even have to worry about the competition. Damien is watching his platoon members train when the brats from the 4th platoon show up again to run their mouths. They insult Damien and his squad, specifically saying his squad members are trash, which is why they are following a failure like Damien. Kyle and the others hear this, but don't want to believe that they are talking about Damien. The 4th platoon squad leader makes sure to repeat himself to let them know that he is calling Damien a brat. He even adds that they are failures, which is why they are following a brat like Damien. Damien is surprised that the shameless guy has come for him again, and at this point he sincerely believes that the dude just wants to get beaten so badly. However, Damien has no intention of falling for a provocation from someone like him. He plans to shut them up during the squad competition by completely crushing them. Damien is about to tell his platoon members to return to the barracks when Kyle and the others raise their voices to tell Platoon 4 that they are dead meat when they finally meet at the competition. The squad is all pissed about the insults from the 4th platoon, and they are eager to show them how to behave when they finally meet at the competition. Without even saying anything, Damien is surprised that the entirety of the team is eager to go up against the 4th platoon, and he considers this the best motivation they could have gotten. Later on, Rayman, the camp chief instructor, meets with the company commander of the camp, Barus, to let him know that they have promising talents amongst the current set of trainees. He tells him that Damien and Apple are the most outstanding ones they have in the camp. Barus asks him what is so special about the two, and Rayman mentions that, with what he's seen, it appears that Damien and Apple can manipulate mana. Barus is shocked when he hears this, and he asks Rayman if the two are from noble houses, but Rayman tells him that they both appear to be ordinary guys. Barus is left wondering how the two got to learn mana, since it is considered too expensive to learn for commoners, which is why it is reserved for nobles. He looks at the paperwork in front of him and learns that Damien enlisted after he lost his parents, and Apple, on the other hand, also doesn't have anything extraordinary going for him. Barus then remembers that he was informed of a disturbance among the units earlier on, and he asks Rayman about this. Rayman lets him know that the issue was related to Damien, and this is because the other squad leaders look down on him, since they believe he is too young to lead a squad. Rayman says the members from Squad 1 got mad because of the insult being thrown at their leader, and it appears that this has even united them more. Barus is surprised to learn that the 1st platoon is solely behind their leader, and he decides to spice things up. When Rayman hears of his plan, he fears that it might backfire on them. But Barus believes that if it does, it certainly means they were never up to the task in the first place. Apparently, Barus wants Rayman to increase the 1st and 4th platoon's training intensity to the maximum to break them. Just as they are planning this, Kyle, as usual, senses hostility, and his usual sense of goosebumps reacts to this. After the instruction from Barus had been implemented, Damien's squad members became worried. It turns out that crawling drills were added to their training, and the trainees believe that this is way too much, just because they returned the insult that was directed at them. Kyle asks Damien if this is true, and since crawling drills were added to the training regimen, Damien obviously knows what their plan is. Damien takes it upon himself to motivate his squad, and he tells them that whether they cranked up the training or not is none of their business because they are not there to play in the first place. However, he admits that the crawling drill will be tougher on their bodies. But he assures them that if they do it well, it will give them a chance to build more stamina than the other platoons. He tells them that there is always a reason behind their training, and when the squad members hear the motivation in his voice, they realize that they have no chance whatsoever at slacking off. Damien tells them that it might be hard for them since it is their first time trying out this training, but he tells them that he is going to help them out so that they can all do their best. One of them asks Damien if they are seriously going to make them crawl on gravel, and Damien asks him if he is expecting a mattress on the drilling site. Kyle expresses his shock at how Damien is talking, and it is as if he has done it multiple times, which he obviously has. In his past life, he spent countless moments pressed against the ground in an attempt to survive, but this is not the sole purpose of crawling drills. Since the training itself is already exhausting, they decided to add crawling drills to it, and once everyone is covered in cuts and bruises, cracks start to appear in the platoon since everyone is already agitated. Basically, overcoming the stress created by training is the real reason they added crawling drills, and this is because they are curious to see which platoon will stick together better between the 1st and 4th platoon. Since he is the squad leader, Damien is not about to ignore such an obvious setup, and he tells his comrades to get their socks out. The team members are surprised, and they ask him why they need socks. Damien tells them that he is about to show them how the socks can become lifesavers during crawling drills. The next day, the 1st platoon reports to the crawling drills section, where they meet the instructor in charge, Nilsson. He tells his assistant to get down to show them how it is done. He explains that low crawling is a posture where a soldier lies flat on the ground with their spear held straight. They are expected to move quickly using the opposite hand and knee. He points to the obstacle in front, telling them that from that moment forward, they are going to use low crawling to get through the obstacle course. He asks them if they are ready, and they all roar in unison, telling him that they are ready. Nilsson is surprised to see that the group is fired up, unlike the 4th platoon. With this, Nilsson tells them to begin, and the trainees get under the barbed wire to start crawling on the rough floor. There is already a trail of blood from those who have engaged the course earlier on. Even Nilsson is surprised that the squad is ordered to engage in crawling drills in the 2nd week, since it is always slated for the 4th week. He wonders what Barus is thinking when giving the order because crawling on the gravel alone is painful and it brings about exhaustion. He expects them to struggle, but just then, he notices that they have almost cleared the obstacle course. Nilsson watches in horror because he wasn't expecting this, since it is supposed to be their first time doing crawling drills. He is completely stunned until he hears the 2nd group asking him when they are supposed to start. He orders them to start immediately, and with joy on their faces, they dive in. Nilsson stands there in confusion as he compares them to starving berserkers because of how insane they are moving. Damien can see the surprise on Nilsson's face, and he knows that he wasn't expecting the trainees to be able to handle something like this that well, since it is their first time. After clearing the course, Kyle and the others rush over to tell Damien how easy the whole thing was. In fact, they had to pretend that they were in pain. They admit that the ground hurt a bit, but tying the socks around their elbow and knee basically helped a lot. The squad rallied behind Damien, calling him a genius, and since their crawling drill is over, they are expected to return to the barracks. Kyle then asks Damien where he learned such tricks, and just as usual, Damien tells him that it is from his late father. However, he adds that his father gave him an additional warning, which is never to get caught by the instructor. Kyle laughs hard while slapping Damien on the back, admitting that it is a compulsory warning. Damien wonders if the dude is slapping him so hard to get revenge on what he's put him through. Nonetheless, he is glad that the crawling drill is now out of the equation, and what they have left is the shield and spear training. Damien is glad that he will finally get to learn the kingdom's greatest spear art. Basically, some people look down on this spear art compared to the famous spear arts of the noble families, but unknown to them, mastering it to the peak will make it a rival to the spear arts taught by the noble families. The real issue is that most people just learn the basics and quit. In his past life, the spear arts were his only way forward, and he held them tight. After he trained relentlessly like his life depended on it, he achieved better results, and it was during this time that he met his master who helped him to grow even more. Thinking about his master, he wonders if he is the same stubborn head that he was back then, and he hopes he gets to meet him very soon. Just then they ran into the 4th platoon, who had just finished their own training too. They are all bruised up, and they are complaining about how tough the training was. The squad leader yells at his teammates to stop complaining, but this only triggers the squad members who are already agitated. They yell at him to mind his tone and not talk to them anyhow just because he is the squad leader. The 1st platoon members see this and realize that they would have been in the same condition if not for Damien's ingenuity. The 1st platoon starts laughing out loud, and this leaves the 4th platoon members wondering how they are still so fine even though they just engaged in the same training drill as them. With the first platoon members laughing as if nothing happened, the fourth platoon squad leader is ultimately pissed, and he believes that they pulled some dirty tricks. However, he plans to get his revenge during the platoon competition, which will take place in a couple of days. Soon afterward, the day of the competition finally arrived, and once all the platoons were assembled, they were informed that the engagement bracket would be called out soon enough. Kyle notices something different about Damien, and he calls his attention to this. Damien makes a joke around this, asking Kyle if he got a little taller than before, and the squad members laugh their hearts out at this. However, it appears that Kyle was actually right, and he had sensed something strange about Damien. It turns out that the night before, Damien had finally advanced the Delft mana cultivation method to the second stage. Thanks to this, he was able to increase his mana reserves incredibly well. Damien is thankful that all of the days he spent in the camp have not been a waste whatsoever. Damien then calls Kyle with a serious voice, telling him that he wants their platoon to win by a landslide. Apparently, the top 5 soldiers in the platoon competition get to choose any piece of equipment that they want from the armory as a reward, and most people pick weapons or gear enchanted with one-time protection spells. However, these are all trash to Damien because they are C rank at best. What he wants is a ring he heard about from one of his subordinates from his past life, who came from the 3rd training camp. It is said to be a ring with a special ability, and it is a permanent special ability, so the ring is most likely A rank, or even higher. Damien figures out that to obtain this ring, he has to win the competition and even take first place. He knows that if Apple, who can use mana, gets to choose first, he might take the ring before he gets the chance to do so. Damien asks Kyle if he can do the task he gave him, and Kyle assures him that he can. Kyle then claps his hands before informing the rest of the squad of Damien's determination, and this immediately serves as a motivation for the squad to get fired up. They all agree with Kyle that it is only right that they take first place. Damien heaves a sigh of relief because everyone is already on board. The instructors then call the first platoon forward, as they are about to call on the platoon they will be going up against. They are informed that the competition is divided into offensive and defensive formations, and once a match ends, they switch offense and defense to fight a total of 2 bouts. If the offensive formation fails to capture the enemy flag within the time limit, it is counted as an automatic loss. It turns out that Damien's platoon will be going up against the second platoon, and the second platoon is put on the offensive formation, while the first platoon will defend. Damien tells his boys that they just have to go at it the way they all planned, and he asks Kyle if he still remembers the plan. Damien had told him that the moment he gives the signal, he is to push the guys in front of him as hard as he can, and Kyle assures him that when it comes to strength, he is up to the task. The match begins and the second platoon comes rushing in, but the first platoon maintains its stand, leaving no single opening for the second platoon to exploit. The second platoon is left frustrated because they can't even get an opening whatsoever. The instructors are also surprised at the type of formation that the first platoon has decided to go with. They believe that this is a formation that won't even give them the chance to move at all. Just then, everything changes when Damien gives the signal and the first platoon starts pushing as hard as they can. The second platoon is left in complete shock that they are being pushed back. Before they know it, the second platoon is forced to defend even though they are supposed to be the ones attacking. Out of nowhere, Damien calls out Kyle's name and Kyle realizes that it is time to go all out. Kyle pushes the dude in front of him and knocks him to the ground, leaving the opposite team trembling in fear of what they just witnessed. Kyle then calls on his teammates to stand shoulder to shoulder with him as they push their way forward. The team continues pushing back the opponent, leaving the opponent's squad leader wondering how Damien's team is coordinated. The moment Damien notices an opening in the opponent's wall, he orders his team to charge in completely. Even the other platoon instructors are left completely astounded, and they ask Brian if he gave them some sort of extra training, but Brian himself lets them know that he is completely surprised. Deep down, Brian wonders how the squad that has only received basic training is able to operate at such a level. Basically, they are already on par with elite soldiers who have received advanced training, and he knows that Damien is the backbone behind their incredible performance. Damien continues calling out instructions, and seeing how the platoon is reacting swiftly to them, Brian realizes the extra training they usually do whenever they get back from their usual training has paid off. Brian smiles proudly because he was initially worried about a kid taking charge of the platoon, but with everything he's seen, he realizes that it was a pretty good decision. As the match continues, Kyle finds his target, which is the flag bearer, and he immediately turns his attention to him. The flag bearer sees Kyle, and fear cripples him as he screams at his team members to do everything possible to stop Kyle from advancing. His team members immediately come together to form a wall to block Kyle's path, but they soon realize something strange. They realize that Kyle is standing still, and Kyle taunts them, telling them that they have finally fallen into his trap. They are asking what the trap is when Damien appears from behind Kyle, and he uses Kyle's shoulder as a boost to launch himself toward the opponent's flag bearer, who is hiding safely at the back. Damien hits the dude with his wooden spear and he knocks him to the ground. At the same time, the time limit is exhausted, and because the offensive side failed to capture the flag, the first platoon comes out victorious. Damien stands boldly over the opponent's flag bearer as his team celebrates their resounding victory behind him. The instructors then mention that they will be going on a short break, and after this, they're going to switch the offense and defense formation. The instructors are impressed by what they just witnessed, and most of them come to the conclusion that the first platoon is going to sweep the tournament. Just then, one of them presents an argument that the first platoon might have a hard time doing this. He points to the distance to show them another platoon that is performing incredibly well, and he tells his colleagues that with this level of skill, it appears that the first platoon will be given a run for their money. It turns out that this platoon is the third platoon, and they have completely overwhelmed their opponent to make them seem like they didn't even train whatsoever. The opposing leader tries to get his team to move, but the team members are already exhausted, and they are even pissed that their squad leader is all the way at the back, so he doesn't even know what they are going through. Standing at the back is the third platoon leader, Gerard, but he is receiving instructions from Apple, who obviously knows what he is doing. Seeing that the opposition is exhausted, Gerard believes that it is time for them to break through, but Apple says no. He tells Gerard that they just have to stand their ground and watch their opponents collapse. Gerard agrees to follow Apple's suggestion, but he wonders how a kid of Apple's age is able to fish out the opponent's weakness so easily. Even though they have been around each other for about 2 weeks, Gerard can clearly see that Apple is not the average kid, and following Apple's instruction, he tells his comrades to stand their ground. Their opponents, the fourth platoon, soon get frustrated, and they yell at the third platoon to come at them already instead of just staying still. Not long after this, Gerard notices that the fourth platoon is completely exhausted, and he orders his men to go after them. The third platoon finally charges in, knocking the fourth platoon back. As they stagger backwards, Gerard calls on Apple to do his thing, and Apple does just as Damien does. He lunges toward the enemy and delivers a powerful strike infused with mana to scatter their formation. The team scatters, leaving the opponent's squad leader completely worried because they are about to get overwhelmed, which means they are not even going to get a chance at the first platoon. The dude turns around with his side eye to see Damien staring at him, and Damien can clearly see that the match is over. Apple and his team finally overwhelm the opponent, completely crushing them, and Damien admits that Apple is no ordinary dude. He realizes that Apple is going to be a tough opponent to deal with, and with this, he figures out that the real match will be against the third platoon. Even though it is going to be a tough match, Damien is not worried, and is even looking forward to going up against Apple. After the rest period is over, the instructor tells the platoons to gather at the training grounds. Kyle reminds Damien that they will be going up against the fourth platoon, and Damien confirms this, saying it is the fourth platoon's last chance, so they must be really desperate to get even a single point. Kyle says this all makes it interesting because he is eager to crush the dude who called Damien a brat. Damien then tells Kyle to just focus on opening a path. Damien turns to his team members to give them a pep talk, and he lets them know that their opponent is heavily exhausted and their teamwork is also nothing to write home about. Even with all these factors, Damien tells his team members that he has no intention of going easy on the fourth platoon. He mentions his plan to utterly crush them, and the rest of the team agrees with him, telling him that they have been waiting for this moment because they have to make them pay for talking trash. Damien urges his guys to stay focused because the plan is to end everything before the 4th platoon can even react. Just as the match is about to start, Damien looks into the opponent's squad leader's eyes, and there is visible fear in them while Damien is smiling at him. The instructors then declare the match open, and Damien is surprised to see that the 4th platoon's square formation is complete trash. He realizes that they could easily break in by charging in, but he plans to end the battle perfectly to make sure that the 4th platoon never, ever thinks of getting back up again. Damien then unleashes Kyle, who excitedly rushes at the enemy ranks. The opponents try to block him, but they soon find themselves contending against Kyle's Hulk-like strength. The squad leader yells at his men to at least come together to block Kyle. He is busy ordering his men around when Damien suddenly appears from above. As he descends toward him like a horror figure, he reminds the guy that he already told him that he would remember what he did. Sweat runs down his face as Damien kicks him to the ground. Instead of dialing down on his foul mouth, he proceeds to intensify how trashy he is because he believes that it is just a one-on-one against Damien. The dude believes that he has what it takes to take Damien down, and he grabs his spear, which he swings at him aggressively. However, Damien easily dodges the spear strike and even grabs the spear while talking down to the dude, asking him if this is all he can do. Before the dude can react, Damien pulls the spear away from him, shocking him. Damien then drops his shield and goes after the dude to punish him. Damien hits him so hard with the spear that he cries out in pain. The dude falls to the ground in pain, and Damien appears above him like a human in demon skin, telling him that it is completely wrong of him to drop his weapon in battle because it is just the same as begging to be killed. Damien tells him to remember this advice always because it might later be a lifesaver for him. Damien then infuses mana into his fist before punching the dude's head so hard that he coughs up blood. The dude passes out from one punch, and Damien is disappointed at how boring it was to defeat the dude. The instructor for the 4th platoon comes rushing in, asking the unconscious dude if he is fine. Since the 4th platoon has lost the ability and strength to continue the match, the victory automatically goes to the 1st platoon. The 1st platoon raises their weapons in celebration, and Kyle admits that the whole thing was refreshing. The platoon commends Damien, who is the backbone behind their victory. The 4th platoon, on the other hand, are left asking themselves how Damien possesses so many skills that he is able to take them out. At this point, the instructors have no choice but to admit that Damien is a prodigy, and one of them even says Damien might be more impressive than they are. The others agree to this, and just then, an overwhelming aura appears behind them. With the incredible aura comes a scary voice that asks the instructors if something interesting is going on. They turn around in shock to find a dude with an eye patch staring down at them, and it turns out that this scary-looking man is the 3rd Division training instructor, Leonhark Belkane. The instructors immediately get into a salute position to welcome Leonhark, and Leonhark asks Brian if Damien is the kid he was talking about. Leonhark points to Damien, who is being thrown around by his team members to celebrate their win, and Brian confirms this. Leonhark smiles when he hears this, and he mentions that it appears that an interesting fellow has finally joined them. Later that day, Damien and his colleagues are in the barracks when one of their colleagues rushes in to tell them that a VIP came to the camp during the match. He says the dude is said to be a legend among other instructors, and Damien becomes interested when he hears this. He asks the dude what the VIP's name is, and the dude fumbles his name, but Damien ultimately makes sense of what he was trying to say. Damien completes it, saying the dude is obviously trying to say Leonhark, and the dude confirms this. Damien's eyes light up in excitement, and to their surprise, Damien rushes out of the room. They ask him where he is going, but he ignores them, and this is because Damien wants to confirm what he heard with his own eyes. Just then, he runs into Leonhark and Brian in the hallway. Leonhark recognizes him as the kid Brian was telling him about, and Brian lets Damien know that they were just on their way to meet him. Before Brian can even finish his statement, Damien has fallen into attention mode to salute Leonhark. Damien looks like a completely different person while he is in Leonhark's presence. Damien can finally confirm that the 3rd Division is connected to the 3rd training camp. However, Damien never thought he would get to meet Leonhark because the training camp is pretty far away, so he didn't think he would come. Damien looks up to Leonhark as if he has seen a savior, and this is because of a simple truth. Leonhark is Damien's master, the man who had a huge impact on his life. It turns out that Leonhark specifically came to check Damien because of everything he's heard. Now that he is seeing him face to face, he can confirm that Damien has mastered a solid mana cultivation method. Leonhark tells Damien that he saw his spear techniques earlier and they were quite impressive, so he wants to know if he has a unit in mind after he is done training. Damien doesn't waste time before revealing his intended unit, which is the Neocalit's unit. Leonhark and Brian are both shocked by his answer, and Leonhark is forced to ask him if he is serious about what he just said. Basically, Neocalit's is one of the 3 units under the 3rd Division, and they are given the task of suppressing monsters from the Bronzerian Forest. It is considered to be the deadliest and harshest unit that records heavy casualties every year. Leonhardt then asks Damien why he wants this tough unit, because most recruits usually want an easy life as royal administrative soldiers. Damien replies that he wants this unit because if he goes there, he can become stronger. Leonhardt then tells Damien that he can actually write him a recommendation letter for the Knight's Order if he wants this, and Brian is shocked to hear this, since it is a place for nobles. However, Damien tells Leonhardt that he's not interested in the offer because his mind is already made up. Apparently, Damien has the intention of meeting someone at the Neo-Calit's unit, which is the sole reason he joined the 3rd Division in the first place. Since Damien is not ready to back down on his decision, Leonhardt decides to go along with his wishes, and he tells him to go back to his room to get some rest. Brian, on the other hand, is completely worried, and he yells at Damien, asking him if he knows the kind of good opportunity that he just turned down. Brian says the Knight's Order is specially reserved for nobles, but he has a huge chance of getting in with Leonhardt's recommendation. Brian fears for Damien's future, and he urges Leonhardt to reconsider, telling him that he will talk to Damien again to get him to change his mind. Leonhardt then asks Brian if he really thinks Damien can't make his own decisions. He tells Brian that he obviously didn't see the look in Damien's eyes while they were talking. Damien had a stern and determined look, leaving Leonhardt really interested in his background. Leonhardt then tells Brian not to tamper with Damien's decisions and let him be. Leonhardt says it is a given that he and Damien will cross paths again as long as he is joining the 3rd Division. The following day, before the match between the 3rd and 1st platoon, Damien tells his platoon members to be at their best because, as they could see the day before, the 3rd platoon is not a pushover. Nonetheless, he assures them that, as it stands, no platoon in the training camp can beat them. Damien then urged his unit members to come together so that they could crush the 3rd platoon just like they had done to others. Moments later, the match begins and the 1st platoon immediately gets into formation. Gerard sees this, and he recognizes it as the same formation that they used against the 4th platoon the day before. Apple agrees that the formation looks solid, and Gerard lets Apple know that his role is quite important in the current battle, and Apple agrees with him. Gerard orders his men to charge, and the two sides soon clash against each other. Damien also provides instructions from behind, telling his guys to push the 3rd platoon back. With the two sides going head-to-head, Gerard realizes that the 1st platoon is using the same method that they used the day before. Suddenly, the 3rd platoon opens up their formation to expose Apple, leaving Damien completely shocked. Just then, Apple lands a decisive hit on the 1st platoon's formation. The moment he does this, Gerard tells his men to push forward. However, Kyle is there to block their path, and by combining two shields, he blocks their path. The 3rd platoon members are left speechless as they wonder where Kyle got his crazy strength from. Damien was already worried when Apple made his last move, and he could see that they managed to survive thanks to Kyle stopping them. With this, Damien has seen how impressive Apple is because he basically blew through his shield bearer in one hit. With Kyle holding up the line, Apple's initial plan is left gasping for air. Apple hates the fact that he had to go against Kyle, who is insanely strong. Apple also notices that the whole situation is a bit tricky because Kyle is now fully focused on him. It turns out that before the match, Damien had told Kyle that he had to completely focus on Apple no matter what. He had told Kyle that as long as he holds Apple back, there is no one else in their ranks who can break through. Kyle didn't even know who Apple was, and Damien assured him that he would when he saw him. Now that they are in the middle of the battle, Kyle has finally gotten to see who Apple is. With the sudden change in plans, Gerard is forced to ask Apple if he can break through, and Apple tells him that he has no choice but to find a way to break through. Since he won't be able to beat Damien by relying solely on brute force, Apple infuses his spear with mana and he lunges at Kyle. He delivers a powerful strike that reverberates through the shield into Kyle's body. Everyone is surprised that Kyle was able to block such a hit, and they all admit that he is impressive. However, Apple plans to keep hitting him until he finally gives in. Apple starts smashing at Kyle's shield, delivering so much power and intensity that it leaves Kyle wondering how a kid of his age has so much strength. Just then, Apple smashes Kyle's shield, and just as he is about to deliver the finishing blow, Damien jumps in to block Apple's strike with his mana-infused shield. The two stare down at each other like proper rivals, but the whistle goes off, and the 3rd platoon loses the round because of their failure to capture the enemy flag within the time limit. Apple is disappointed with the loss, and he can't believe that Kyle was able to endure his attack. He had the intention of wrapping things up fast, but Kyle ruined his plan. With Kyle breathing heavily on the ground, Damien asks him if he is fine, and Kyle's ego pushes him to reply that he is good. Just then, Damien tells him to stay in the back for the second half, and this shocks Kyle, who tries to plead his case, saying he didn't break anything. However, Damien reminds him that there are still 2 weeks of training left, and if he pushes himself too hard, he might not be able to finish training properly. Damien tells him that instead of pushing himself, he is going to leave him to guard the flag in the center, saying he is going to trust him with this. Deep down, Kyle figures out that Damien is just trying to protect his pride even though he is pretending to scold him. He knows the flag is basically useless this round since they are the ones attacking. Nonetheless, Kyle collects the flag and he walks to the back, assuring Damien that he is not going to let the opponent take the flag, so it is left for him to completely crush them. With this, the instructor tells the platoons to switch positions and Damien gives his team a short pep talk before the match. He lets them know that he is aware that they are exhausted, but he reminds them that this is the last match, and since they are on the attacking side, he doesn't want them to use the full time limit. He tells his team that he wants them to take the opposition's flag in 5 minutes to end the match as fast as they can. As the two platoons prepare for the final showdown, Damien makes his own personal goal board. During the previous matches, he showed everything he could as a platoon leader cadet, but now Damien plans to leave a lasting impression on the instructors by showing his individual charm. This match with the 3rd platoon is the best place, especially because a tough contender like Apple is there. A win against them would practically guarantee Damien the title of Outstanding Trainee. Damien notices that Apple is planning to guard the flag himself since he used up a lot of stamina during the first half. It won't be easy for him to hold the front line throughout the battle, like the last time. Still, he knows there's no avoiding direct confrontation with Apple at the end of this battle. Soon afterward, the instructor orders the 1st platoon to attack and the 3rd platoon to defend. As the final competition begins, tension high enough to power the city fills the air as everyone gears up to fight tooth and nail for the grand prize. Damien then informs his team that they will be going all out from the start and orders them to stay focused and follow him. As soon as they confirm his instructions, the team charges forward like an angry bull, spooking the 3rd platoon guys. The 3rd platoon is puzzled that Damien's team is moving so fast, and despite their speed, their formation doesn't break at all. The platoon leader, Gerard, warns his team that Damien's platoon is not to be trifled with, and he orders them to raise their shields high. Just as Gerard is about to warn them to keep an eye on the enemy team leader, Damien swiftly appears before them. It was useless for them to keep an eye on him, and Damien infuses his spear with mana as he plans to punch straight through their defense in one strike. After infusing the spear with mana, he immediately attacks their front, easily breaking right through the 3rd platoon's shield. While they struggle to hold their ground, Damien continues to wiggle the mana-infused spear around, pushing them apart and tearing apart their defense. After making way, Damien yells for his platoon to push through, while the 3rd platoon scrambles to stop them. Seeing that their defense is crumbling, the 3rd platoon members decide to focus all their effort on taking down Damien. Together, several spears attack him, but before they can react, Damien swiftly bypasses them, leaving them jamming their spears together without a target. Once he totally brings down the first defense of the 3rd platoon, Damien orders his team to quickly regroup, and in the blink of an eye, the 1st platoon regroups right in front of the 3rd platoon. Gerard is stunned as he tries to figure out how they got close to his team so quickly, but Apple doesn't care about the 1st platoon and reminds Gerard that Damien is the key target. According to Apple, as long as Damien is kept in check, the 1st platoon can never steal their flag. Apple then decides to be the one to take Damien down, so he hands the flag to Gerard, telling him to protect it. Gerard is worried, though a part of him also feels inadequate for having to rely on someone younger than the rest of them. Meanwhile, Damien can't shake a sense of unease as he watches Apple march toward the battlefield for the final confrontation. He was about to face the future Grand General himself, Apple Vanstriel, whom he could only look up to in his past life. Soon, Apple leaps forward to attack while Damien prepares for the face-off of his life, and he knows this is his chance if he wants to measure himself against a legendary figure like Apple. When Damien swiftly dodges, he realizes that Apple's attack was just a false move to trick him into dodging, and while Damien is distracted, Apple strikes again. But Damien sees right through this trick, and just as Apple is about to land the real strike, Damien blocks the attack with his spear, taking Apple by surprise. As the duo waits to see who makes the next move, Damien silently urges Apple to fight him seriously because he plans to give this battle everything he's got. Damien then leaps forward to attack him, but Apple manages to block the attack. Without giving him time to catch his breath, Damien goes in for another attack, but Apple blocks it again. However, this time, Damien's mana-infused spear almost shatters Apple's mana-infused spear. The overwhelming power of Damien's mana leaves Apple genuinely stunned, and for a moment he finds himself questioning whether Damien is really a commoner or if he comes from a special background similar to his own. But Damien doesn't give him any time to rest, and as he continues to attack, Apple finds himself wondering how Damien is so skilled at mana control, and he finds it even more absurd to run into an insane mana freak like this at a backwater training camp. After relentlessly pressuring Apple, Damien finally pauses. Then, declaring that it's time to bring the battle to an end, he gathers his mana for another strike. With complete confidence, he swears that there is no way Apple will be able to block his next attack, and true to Damien's claim, this strike takes Apple by surprise and completely shatters his spear. The shockwave from the attack even throws him off, slamming him to the ground. While Apple clutches his chest in pain, Damien wastes no time and swiftly darts toward the enemy camp to retrieve their flag. Apple continues to struggle while thinking about the flag, and from his blurred vision, he could see it in the distance. Unfortunately for him, Damien snatches the flag easily, declaring victory for the first platoon while Apple watches helplessly. After retrieving the flag, Damien returns to help Apple up and commends him for putting up a good fight. Apple then congratulates him but vows never to lose the next time they face off in battle. However, Damien hopes they can fight on the same side next time and not against each other. He jokingly teases that he might not be able to defeat Apple a second time, but Apple tells him to stop exaggerating. Damien then watches with mixed feelings as Apple walks away. He can't believe he beat the future legendary general, but Damien also notes that this experience might turn Apple into a greater monster than he was in his past life. However, for now, he decides to live in the moment and enjoy this victory instead of worrying that Apple might surpass him in the future. Soon, the members of the first platoon surround Damien, cheering, and from a distance, Raymond watches as they celebrate. He then promises to make sure that the trainees finish their remaining 2 weeks of training as strongly as they did today. Leonhardt agrees with that, but suggests giving them time to enjoy their sweet victory for now. To reward them for their win, the first platoon is served with a set of meals that they didn't think were possible to see at the camp. Right there on the dining table is steak, chicken, and all sorts of nice dishes that they can think of. The team realizes that winning the competition was really worth it, and in no time, they dig in. Even though they are completely exhausted, they still have the strength to rush the food in front of them, and Damien doesn't even blame them, since it is not every day they get to eat meat. Damien looks around and notices that Leonhardt has left already. He seriously wishes that he could have gotten the chance to talk to his master a bit longer. Just then, the instructor shows up at their seat, asking Damien if he is still sticking with his decision from yesterday. Damien tells the man that he still hasn't changed his mind, and the instructor tries to convince him further. He mentions that Leonhardt offered Apple the same deal, and it was pretty obvious that Apple accepted it. Damien replies that he respects whatever decision Apple made, but it is his life, so he gets to live it the way he wants. The instructor scoffs when he hears this, and he comes to the conclusion that Damien is a stubborn kid because he has finally realized that there is no changing Damien's mind whatsoever. The instructor raises his glass of wine to make a toast to the trainees, telling them to brace themselves because they still have to train hard to achieve their goals, while he secretly wishes Damien the best in whatever career path he chooses. The rest of the team raises their glasses too, offering their solidarity to the kingdom. Before they knew it, time went by in a flash, and they soon got to the final week of training. Damien notices that during this time, the trainees' attitude has changed, and this is not limited to his squad. Basically, the entire third training camp has changed for the better, which means the squad competition was a great catalyst. During one of the training breaks, Kyle walks up to Damien, asking him if he has heard about what happened to the fourth platoon. Apparently, their morale has completely gone down since the squad competition, and their dropout rate is really insane. Kyle says their squad leader was the first to run off after the competition ended, and Damien expresses his disappointment in the fella. Just then, Damien tells Kyle and the others that there is still something that they have to be worried about. He tells them that they might have secured a high group score, but it is pretty important that if they want a good placement, they have to worry about their individual score too. Damien knows that everyone on the team is eager to go to the royal palace because it is the dream of every commoner. However, out of 160 recruits, only 30 are allowed to apply for the palace. To make it worse, only a third of those who apply get the job in the end. Kyle admits that the whole situation is fierce, and Damien tells him that it is pretty regular that everyone at the camp enlisted because of that. Just then, Kyle grabs Damien, asking him if he is aiming for a royal administrative position just like them. Damien then tells Kyle that he has no intention of going to the royal palace, and Kyle asks him his reason for this because his score could easily get him into a high position. Damien asks Kyle if he really wants to be a royal administrative soldier, telling him that this only means that he will be stuck in the palace all day. Kyle admits that it is going to be exhausting, but since it is the best assignment out there, he believes that it is just right to take it. However, Damien assures Kyle that a guy like him will not even last a month in the royal palace before making a run for the exit. Damien reminds him that he is someone who likes using his strength, so staying at the palace will only bore him. Kyle then asks Damien where he is going, and Damien mentions that he will be going to Neokalitz. The moment he mentions this, the entire squad loses it. Kyle turns around to tell them that Damien has officially lost his mind. However, Damien kicks him in the leg to force him to acknowledge his decision. Kyle quickly changes his stance, commending Damien for being a crazy person, which is why he likes him. Since the break time is over, the trainees are ordered to return to training. Soon afterward, the day of discharge arrives, and the trainees are gathered. Barus stands before them to give them a speech, and he urges them to continue pushing themselves forward even after leaving the training camp, so that they may contribute to the kingdom. The trainees pay attention to salute Barus and also offer their solidarity to the kingdom. With Barus's speech out of the way, Raymond steps forward to announce the top 5 trainees. Just as expected, the #1 spot goes to Damien, and Damien smiles in happiness because he got the job done. The second on the list is Apple, followed by Kyle, Gerard, and Alex, the second platoon leader. Raymond then tells the 5 to follow him, informing them that, as a reward, they will each be issued one piece of equipment from the armory. Upon arriving at the armory, he tells them that they can choose any single item from inside, and they are going to start from the top, which is Damien. Damien eagerly enters because this is what he has been waiting for. Upon entering, Damien is impressed by how organized everything is, and as he looks around, he wonders if there are any treasures that he doesn't know about. After looking around for a while, he concludes that there is nothing of high importance, so he should just get the ring that he is there for. As he walks toward the ring, Damien realizes that it was just as he was told because he has not been able to take his eyes off the ring since he walked in. Damien finally obtains the ring, which is said to cast a brief invisibility spell when infused with mana. Damien knows that Apple is the only one who would have noticed the ring since he is the only one who can use mana among the top 5 trainees. After obtaining the ring, Damien steps out and Apple is asked to step in and take what he wants too. Since Damien has taken what Apple chose in his past life, he is curious to see what Apple will choose this time around. Moments later, Apple steps out carrying something strange in his hands. Damien is surprised that he came out pretty fast. Just then, Damien notices the item in Apple's hands and his reaction immediately changes. Kyle notices this and he asks him what the issue is, but Damien tells him that it is nothing. It turns out that Apple came out with a seal, and this is a seal that carries the crest of a kingdom that already fell long ago. Damien had always wondered how Apple got to learn how to use mana, and this started giving him ideas that there is a possibility that Apple is connected to the fallen kingdom. After making sure everyone has picked an item, Raymond shuts the door, and as he turns around, Apple's pick catches his eye. Raymond then asks if Apple knows what he picked, and Apple simply explains that he picked it because he sensed divine power from it. Raymond agrees that the seal somewhat contains divine power because it was actually imbued with the power to ward off misfortune. He then commends Gerard for picking a decent spear and Kyle for his shield, crafted by an artisan named Walter. When he turns to Damien, Raymond asks him if he's really fine with just that ring since all it does is reduce body weight. Damien is surprised to hear this because he only knows the ring can make him invisible. Raymond then advises him to try it on, and the moment he does, Damien realizes that his weight has decreased, making him move much faster than usual. After testing it out, Raymond asks what he thinks about it, and Damien reassures him that the ring is even better than he thought. With invisibility and weight reduction, Damien is certain he made a good choice, and the ring is definitely an A-rank artifact. Since everyone is satisfied with their pick, Raymond orders them to head back to apply for their desired postings. A few moments later, they're sitting in an office where Raymond distributes forms to them to select their choice. Without hesitation, Damien chooses the Neocalit's unit, but Raymond is very disappointed that Damien didn't change his mind in the end. He notes that Damien could thrive in the Night Order with his skills, but the boy is dead set on signing his death warrant. After filling it out, Damien hands the form to Raymond, who tells him to be careful because the Neocalit's unit is extremely dangerous. Damien then thanks him for his concern, and Raymond pats him on the head, commending him for working hard during the past month. He lets Damien know that he can head out once the notices arrive in a few days. Damien thanks Raymond once more for all his help before taking his leave. Outside the office, he cannot help but feel conflicted about finally going to Neocalit's. He has been looking forward to it for a long time, but now that the moment has arrived, he finds himself feeling both excited and uneasy. Suddenly, Apple bursts out in anger because he heard about Damien's choice of posting. He angrily demands to know why Damien didn't choose the Night Order with his skills. Damien simply explains that the Night Order is not where he belongs. Annoyed, Apple reveals that he picked the Night Order and even received a letter of recommendation from Leonhardt. Damien commends his choice, telling Apple that he will do well at the Night Order. However, Apple doesn't feel that way because Damien already rejected the same choice, yet he says it's a wise one. Apple then tells Damien that he's an unpredictable person, after which he reminds him that the Neocalit's is a dangerous place and he tells Damien to take care of himself. Afterwards, the duo shakes hands, promising to meet each other again in the future. After the emotional farewell, Apple decides to take his leave, and as Damien watches him walk away, he wonders if Apple knows that he's destined to become a Grand General of the Baroque Kingdom. However, after their duel, Damien admits that Apple might even become greater than he was in the previous life. Nevertheless, he looks forward to the future great general, Apple Van Striel. Putting that aside, Damien decides to go back to his platoon to bid them farewell. A few moments later, he arrives at the dorm where the boys are packing up to leave, and Kyle immediately blocks him. Apparently, he thought Damien wanted to leave without saying goodbye. However, Damien assures him that he was planning on saying goodbye since they don't even know when they'll be seeing each other again. Kyle remarks that Damien will be seeing him sooner than he thinks, but Damien is confused by his words. Brushing that aside, Kyle then leads Damien to the center of the room where he calls the trainees' attention, telling them that Damien wants to give his final farewell address. Damien then begins his speech by commending the team for their hard work. He also thanks them for following him and tells them to keep working hard in their main units too. In unison, the boys cheer for Damien and thank him for everything he did for them. They hope to reconnect with each other in the future, and Damien wishes them all the best. After his farewell speech, Damien is preparing to leave the camp when a voice draws his attention, and it turns out to be Deal Work. Deal cheerfully greets Damien, and later the duo heads to the Hummel Guild to brief Damien on the progress of his investment. There, Deal gives him documents detailing how his investment funds were used, and she explains that based on his terms, the projected return is 3% of the net revenue. After scanning through the document, Damien is impressed with how thorough Deal is and how she organized the breakdown so neatly for him to understand. After going through the report, Deal tells Damien to ask her any questions, but Damien says he has no questions to ask after seeing such a good report. So he tells her to proceed exactly according to how they discussed and lets her know that someone will soon bring the insurance money under his name. Deal wants Damien to sign a detailed contract with her, but Damien turns down the offer because he trusts Deal. He explains that a contract is only needed when there are trust issues between both parties, but he completely trusts Deal to handle things on her own without a contract. Deal is surprised by this and remarks that Damien is a very unique human. Shortly after, an employee arrives with the money for the investment in a small box, and Damien tells Deal to verify the funds. However, when she opens it, Deal is shocked because the funds promised were 300 gold, but this box contains over 500 gold. Since the funds have increased, Deal wants to revise everything they discussed, especially Damien's returns, but Damien stops her. This is simply because the extra funds are a way of showing his appreciation that Deal treated him like a normal adult instead of a greenhorn kid when she broke down the investment process. After getting that out of the way, Deal asks Damien about where his main unit is stationed since he just graduated from the training camp. Damien tells her that he's heading west to the Neoculits unit near the Bronzerian forest. Deal is shocked to hear this as she wonders whether Damien volunteered to be posted there. Damien simply asks if she thinks anyone can force the top trainee from camp against his will. He jokingly tells her not to worry since the investment money will belong to her in the event of his death. However, Deal doesn't receive this joke well as she tells him to cut it out. Damien is taken aback by her sincerity because he thought she was just a simple, sweet lady. But seeing her this angry, he concludes that she can sometimes be as sharp as a knife. Deal then asks Damien about his departure date, and Damien replies that it's in 3 days' time. Deal then prepares to leave and reassures Damien that his investment will be put to good use. With the investment issue settled, Damien decides to enjoy himself for the next 3 days before leaving, since he'll be stuck in a dreadful forest for a while. For the next few days, Damien ate and drank to his heart's content, and even slept on the street at some point. 3 days later, it was time to depart for the Neocalits unit. Damien double-checks his belongings to make sure he has packed everything he needs for the journey. Just as he is about to leave, Kyle suddenly appears with his luggage in tow, reminding Damien of his promise that they would meet again soon. Damien quickly realizes what Kyle is up to, and with a cheerful grin, Kyle wraps an arm over Damien's shoulder and admits that he is not ready to let the bond they forged at training camp come to an end. He then reveals that he also applied for a posting to the Neocalits unit as well. Kyle then confidently tells Damien that, just as they excelled together during training, he looks forward to continuing their cooperation. Although Damien never wanted to bring anyone else into the dangers that come with serving in the Neocalits unit, he cannot help but feel relieved and grateful to have a familiar face by his side. Just as they are about to head out, they hear a voice calling out to them from behind, telling them to wait. They turn around to see Deal panting heavily while thanking her lucky stars that she made it in time. Damien is totally surprised to see her, and he asks her what brought her there. Deal mentions that she was informed that the Neocalits unit is far away from civilization, so she decided to arrange for a carriage to assist Damien on his journey. She reveals that the carriage has been stocked with rations and everything he needs once he gets to his destination. Damien is left speechless when he hears this, which forces him to ask her why she is going through all the trouble. Following Damien's example, she makes the same hand gesture that he made back then when he was telling her it was a way of repaying the kindness. She lets him know that it is no different from how he repaid her generosity, so she is basically doing the same. She lets him know that the Hummel Merchant Group has a policy to always repay its debts, which is why she went out of her way over the past 2 days to secure the carriage for him. Even Kyle is blown away at how hard Deal was trying to make life easier for our boy. Once everything is concluded, Damien prepares to take his leave, and Deal wishes him a safe trip. Damien and Kyle get into the carriage and begin their journey to the Neocalits unit. Soon afterward, Kyle gets motion sickness because of the rough road and the gloomy things he has seen so far. Damien admits that walking the path would have been pretty horrible, but it appears that they have made it to Urkal, since they can now see a garrison out there. Kyle then mentions his surprise that he hasn't seen a single local since they got there, and Damien replies that they are most likely hiding from monsters or inside the Bronzerian forest. Apparently, the majority of the locals living in Urkal make their living from foraging for an herb called amancho inside the Bronzerian forest. Basically, amancho is a toxic plant that causes severe fever and diarrhea. However, when this herb is processed correctly, it becomes the base ingredient for a highly effective painkiller. The Bronzerian forest accounts for over 60% of the amancho supply in the kingdom, which is why the locals have no choice but to risk their necks. Moments later, they arrive at the base, and Kyle's excitement starts to dim when he notices how gloomy the base looks. He asks Damien if he is even sure that people live there because it basically looks like it is going to collapse just from touching the building. Damien then catches the scent of blood, and he tells Kyle to prepare himself because someone is coming. Through the thick fog, a bunch of soldiers, who look like life has completely overwhelmed them, walk past the two. They are bruised, trashed, and they have a stern and wary look on their faces. As they disappear into the distance, Kyle asks Damien why they all look like ghosts, and Damien sighs before telling Kyle that he has to get used to seeing things like this. Damien tells him that the soldiers basically fight to the death every single day. This causes Damien to remember a memory from his past life where he was addressing the soldiers in his unit. He had asked them the most important duty of a soldier, and they all gave their interesting answers, like crushing the enemies and the like. One of them replies that taking down as many enemies as one can before dying, and this earns him a punch to the head. He demands to know why his boss hit him out of everyone who gave their answer, and Damien tells him that he gave the worst answer of all. Damien then tells his men that the most important thing is not dying. He tells them never to throw their lives away, so they have to survive to make it back, no matter what it takes. He tells them that they have to get stronger to avoid dying, and his men acknowledge this. Remembering this memory, Damien finds it comical because they all ended up dead in the end. Damien then tells Kyle that it is time for them to head inside, and Kyle holds back. But Damien reminds him of why they are there in the first place. He tells him that they are there to get stronger, so there is no time to stand outside, waiting around like statues. Kyle is about to offer more of his concern when Damien leaves him behind, forcing him to run after him. Meanwhile, the soldiers who had just arrived from the battlefield are raging because of the losses they incurred on the battlefield. The garrison had told them it was just a small orc unit, but they ended up running into a well-organized unit. Basically, most of the men in the unit are there because of a court-martial, so they don't even have the option to leave. The only option they have is to rot in a cell for the rest of their lives or try to survive in the unit no matter what it takes. Apparently, one of them, Charleston, has almost lost his arm, and the commander of the unit, Taryn, who is a nice dude, suggests that they request a priest from the temple. One of the soldiers then reminded Taryn that the priests charge exorbitant rates, which their salaries wouldn't even be able to cover. Just then, Taryn whips out a pouch containing 20 gold coins, and he tells them to put it toward the bill. The soldiers are shocked when he offers this money, since it is supposed to be the money for his mother's surgery. Taryn claims that his mother's condition has improved a bit, so she doesn't immediately need the surgery. Seeing how selfless their commander is, all the soldiers in the room start making contributions too. Even one of them, who is a rookie, Dianel, offers to contribute, and they try to dissuade him, but he claims that Charleston got hurt because of him. The commander is left with tears in his eyes as he calls him an admirable little shit. One of them then rushes off to get a priest from the temple. Taryn walks up to Dianel, asking him how old he will be turning that year, and he replies that he is going to be 18. Taryn hears this, and he reminds everyone that it's already been a year since Dianel enlisted, and if only Charleston can hold on to his life, Dianel will no longer be the newbie. Suddenly, one of the soldiers informs Taryn that the new recruits that he talked about arrived not too long ago. Everyone's mood immediately changes when they hear that there are new recruits. Taryn claims he had forgotten about this because of how horrible the battle was. Taryn then calls on Dianel, telling him that it is time for them to check out his juniors. Soon afterward, Damien and Kyle report to their commander, Taryn, who carefully observes the duo. Taryn concludes that Kyle looks a bit capable and he has a strong build, but looking at Damien, he can't seem to understand what a kid is doing in such a dangerous place. He asks Damien about his age just to be sure there aren't any mistakes, and Damien confirms that he's indeed 13 years old. Taryn can't understand why someone this young would freely volunteer for a place like this, since Damien is 5 years younger than the unit's youngest soldier, Dianel. As Taryn mentions what is on his mind about Damien, Kyle tells him that Damien actually graduated first in the training camp. However, Taryn isn't impressed, as being in first place doesn't matter in a dump like this. He then reminds them that the training camp is completely different from the Neocalit's unit. Even so, Damien lets Taryn know that he understands the difference between the two places. But what Taryn still finds puzzling is why Damien came here knowing what kind of place this is. Putting that aside, he calls on Dianel and orders him to assign Damien and Kyle their bunks and put them on cleaning duty. Dianal then orders the duo to follow him, and on their way to the dorms, he lets them know that there are no ranks in the Neocalit's unit. Dianal explains that Taron is the unit commander, and after him the vice commander. However, below those two, seniority is solely determined by who arrived in the unit first. A few minutes later, they arrive at the dorms, and upon entering, the room is a dirty mess. Dianal then tells the duo to choose whichever locker they want since they'll probably not be using it for a long time. Confused by his words, Kyle questions what he means, and Dianal simply reveals that he's been in the camp for a year, yet he's still the youngest, so Kyle should do the math and figure out what that means. Unfortunately, Kyle is terrible at maths, so he's about to sarcastically ask how Dianal expects him to figure it out when Dianal immediately kicks him in the shin to put him in his place. As Kyle clutches his shin in pain, Dianal sternly explains that what he said earlier means every single person who came after him is dead. As Dianal turns to leave, he tells the duo that he'll explain the rest later. But first, he orders them to unpack their bags and start cleaning the barracks immediately. Once he leaves, Kyle curses Dianal under his breath while Damien chuckles as if he finds the whole encounter amusing. Kyle soon notices this and asks why he's smiling, but Damien quickly puts on a straight face, explaining that there was no real reason. He then excitedly remarks that it feels as though nothing has changed about this place. Afterwards, Damien tells Kyle that they need to start their cleaning duty, but this surprises Kyle. He can't believe that Damien is just going to put up with such blatant hazing. However, Damien doesn't seem to mind at all, but instead, it looks like he's even looking forward to cleaning thoroughly. Damien then happily hands Kyle a rag, telling him that they need to do this properly since it's their first mission. He even enthusiastically declares that they need to clean the place well enough for someone to lick the floor with their tongue. Kyle is shocked to hear this as he questions whether Damien sees him as a vacuum cleaner. Meanwhile, at the Neocalit's unit military store, Dianal is thinking about the new recruits while waiting for the storekeeper to finish his order. Dianal doesn't look forward to having any new juniors because he has lost so many that it has left a traumatizing mark on him. At some point, he just stopped getting close to the new guys because after growing attached to them and wanting to protect them, they suddenly died on the battlefield in the blink of an eye. Because of this, the Neocalit's has become that sort of place where no one truly stays long enough, and all that is left is death. After experiencing the newbies come and go, Dianal finally hardened his heart and stopped looking after the rookies since they're just gonna die anyway. However, something about Damien and Kyle keeps bothering him, especially Damien. The way Damien looked at him when they first met, Dianal felt as though Damien knew him. Just then, the storekeeper's voice pulls Dianal back to reality, informing him that his shoe sole repair is done. Dianal thanks him, and just as he's about to pick up the shoes, the storekeeper asks him about the two clueless idiots who passed by earlier. He comments that they must be the new recruits, and Dianal confirms this, after which, the man says he knew the moment he saw them. He also remarks that Damien and Kyle looked hopeless, so they must be Dianal's juniors. After a brief silence, Dianal picks up his shoe and heads out to check on his so-called juniors. On his way, he makes up his mind to crush their spirits first because in the Neocalit's, motivation, confidence, and pride will only shorten their lifespan. Soon afterward, he arrives outside the dorms, and just as he's about to open the door, Dianal hopes they didn't mess up something as simple as cleaning. However, upon entering the room, Dianal is utterly shocked to find the place sparkly clean and Damien looking ever so cheerful as if he was born to clean. While Dianal is still frozen in shock, a few other soldiers arrive and are equally surprised to see the clean room. One of them even questions how hard Dianal must have grilled the rookies to make them turn the barracks into a whole new building. But Dianal begins to panic as he stammers for words to explain that he didn't even lift a finger. To make things even more creepy, Damien walks up to him, beaming with a smile to report that they have finished the cleaning assignment. With a smile on his face, Damien asks Dianal to check and see if he's satisfied. However, this only heightens Dianal's anxiety because when rookies are told to clean, they usually grumble and pretend to do it, but Damien and Kyle made the place spotless. It then hits Dianal that this might be a legendary form of passive-aggressive rebellion to mess with him. A few moments later, Taron arrives and begins to laugh heartily, commending the duo for making the barracks look like a brand new place. The other soldiers are surprised to see Taron laugh since he usually wears a straight face and never shows any emotions. After cackling, Taron calls on Damien and Kyle to ask if they really cleaned the place all by themselves. When the boys answer that they did, he questions why they cleaned it so thoroughly instead of just doing a little surface cleaning. Damien replies that it is because it was an order from Dianal, so they were merely following orders. Taron is taken aback by this response as he tries to read into what's truly going on in Damien's little mind. After spending so long on the battlefield where life and death are a constant, Taron has learned to gauge a person's depth at a glance. He then carefully studies Kyle and concludes that Kyle could be sent into real combat after a little polishing. However, no matter how much he observes Damien, Taron can't seem to read him at all. He was also curious why the top graduate from the training camp would willingly go through such a thing without complaints. Taron concludes that Damien must have a special reason for coming here, and he's looking forward to figuring out that reason. Putting that aside, Taran calls everyone's attention, and as he wraps his arms around Damien and Kyle, he orders the team to fully welcome their youngest members and make them feel at home. Damien and Kyle are relieved to hear that they've finally been accepted as real members of the team. Later that night, Damien can't seem to fall asleep as he keeps thinking about his previous life. Back then, he was in the barracks with Daniel, who asked him whether the war would ever end. Damien thought about it for a moment before responding that it would only end if they surrendered. Daniel then told Damien to make sure not to die before him, but Damien told him not to joke about such things. Still, Daniel took it as a promise, and looking back now, Damien notes that he never gave Daniel an answer. However, he still kept his promise in some way since he practically outlived him on the battlefield. Unable to sleep, Damien decides to practice his monocultivation method, so he heads into the forest next to the barracks. There, Damien notices someone training with a sword, and upon closer inspection, he realizes that it's Daniel. Damien isn't surprised because in the previous life, Daniel was always a training fanatic. He then notices that Daniel is struggling with a greatsword, and Damien wonders why he's using that kind of sword. Basically, it is not compatible with Daniel's strength and speed, so it is a terrible choice for him. But Damien doesn't want to say anything because in the previous life, it took him a long time before he could convince Daniel to switch to a different weapon. Damien knows that saying anything right now will probably earn him a beating from Daniel. He knows that he's stronger, so Daniel might not even land a hit, but Damien doesn't want to lose the little rapport he managed to build with Daniel. So he decides to leave him be and suggests the swap when a good opportunity presents itself. The following morning, the soldiers gather for training in front of a huge rugged mountain. Before the training even begins, the soldiers are already complaining. One of them decides to have some fun before their captain arrives, so he urges others to place bets on whether the rookies can endure the stamina training. Everyone immediately agrees with him and bets several silver coins that the rookies will pass out before the completion of the morning training. Kyle is a bit annoyed when he realizes that the soldiers are trying to use them for entertainment. He's even more displeased that everyone looks down on them. Damien, on the other hand, is surprised that the unit is a mess and no one is trying to keep the soldiers in check. Fed up, Damien walks up to them while Kyle wonders what he's trying to do. Damien then appears behind the soldiers and offers to join in on the bet, making them laugh at him for wanting to be a sucker. But Damien refuses to back down and even proposes altering the terms. He then produces a gold coin, telling them that he'll be betting it all on himself to beat everyone during the morning training and take first place. The mood among the soldiers immediately shifts on hearing Damien's bold and disrespectful claim. Damien then asks whether they have any more terms to add, and the soldiers start grinning, confident they can put him in his place. One of them then adds that all the money from the bet goes to Damien if he wins, but he has to do all their laundry for a month if he loses. Since a losing term has been added, Damien asks for another condition for himself. He tells them to give him free time during the training hours for a month. Everyone's mood immediately changes when they hear Damien's demand, but before they can refuse, Taran arrives and agrees to Damien's request. He then calls on Daniel and orders him to join the bet, but Daniel doesn't want to. However, Taran goads him into it by asking whether he's afraid of losing to a junior, but Daniel explains that he doesn't want to since it'd be a waste of his money to bet on such a predictable match. Since he claims that money is the problem, Taran decides to pay for him, leaving Daniel with no choice but to join the bet. Taran then promises to give Damien free time during training hours if he performs better than the seniors. Afterwards, he sternly warns the seniors that anyone who loses to Damien will have to face hellish training for the next month. So he advises them to take this bet seriously and perform like their lives depended on it. The soldiers are spooked by Taran's tone as they begin to regret starting the bet in the first place. However, this also pumps them up, making them determined not to lose face. Meanwhile, Damien quietly watches them, pleased that things are going according to his plan. It turns out he didn't join this bet just for the free time, but he did it to change the rotten atmosphere in the camp where the soldiers act as if they could die at any moment. Damien knows that living this way without hope will not only end up harming them, but also everything around them. Soon afterward, Taran announces that it is time to begin the physical training, and for today's training, he orders them to climb all the way to the peak of the Rocky Mountain while carrying one huge log of wood each. The soldiers immediately protest, complaining that this isn't their usual training. They remind Taran that this training is usually meant for newbies, but Taran barks at them to shut up. He then orders them to immediately pick a log and move instead of whining like a sissy. Without hesitation, the group loads a log of wood on their shoulder as they begin the climb to the top of the Rocky Mountain. A few minutes into the climb, most of them were already struggling while wondering why Taran was suddenly switching up their training routine. One guy says it's because of the rookies, while the other remarks that the rookies might pass out soon since it's their first time doing this kind of tough training. However, when they turn around to check the rookies, the soldiers are stunned to find it empty, leaving them wondering what happened. Realizing that Damien might be ahead, they quickly look up to the peak only to see him almost at the peak. They then begin to wonder when Damien got ahead of them, But what they don't know is that this is a cakewalk for him thanks to his new gear. Damien's ring didn't just reduce his body weight, but it also reduces the weight of any object he's carrying, so the log of wood is practically a feather. Damien is relieved he made a great choice by picking this ring. Soon he turns around to check on the seniors and realizes that they're still a long way off. The only one managing to keep up was Dianel, but Damien is surprised to see this. Dianel, on the other hand, struggles to keep moving and notes that Damien is about to reach the peak. Moments later, Damien reaches the finish line to everyone's surprise, including Taryn, who never thought Damien would defeat Dianel. Taryn immediately declares the training session over, and just as he promised, he lets the seniors know that they are about to be put through hell during their training session. Unknown to them, the training hell is about to be the least of their worries, and out of nowhere, one of the soldiers calls Taryn's attention to something happening down below in their unit building. Taryn is shocked when he turns around to see a red flag raised in the middle of the barracks because a red flag is used to signal a Grade 1 emergency. Soon afterward, Taryn and the team return to the barracks, and Taryn asks for updates on why the red flag was raised. He's informed that it's because there have been several fatalities in the Bronzerian forest. Taryn then asks for the identities of the victims and the exact location of the attack. The informant tells him that the victims are herb gatherers, and the location was inside the restricted area of the forest. Taryn's Vice Commander Aaron curses under his breath as he wonders why people always flock to where they're told not to. Taryn then asks for the magnitude of the damage and the type of monster involved in the attack, but the informant tells him that none have been confirmed. He says that all they know for now is that the herb gatherers entered the Forbidden Zone with 6 mercenaries, and no one knows what type of monster they're dealing with. Taryn then asks how many men the team can mobilize immediately, and Aaron informs him that they can mobilize about 70, excluding the wounded. Taryn orders him to also exclude the slightly wounded and gather just 50 healthy soldiers as quickly as possible for the mission. Once Aaron heads out to prepare, Taryn falls deep in thought as he notes that they're in a bad situation. The fact that they have been frequently deploying soldiers on missions is troubling, making Taryn worry that the forest might be changing into something worse than it used to be. Soon afterward, Aaron assembles the healthy soldiers, and Taryn orders them to grab their weapons and head out. Before he can leave, Damien and Kyle ask to tag along, but Taryn instantly denies their request. He explains that real combat is different no matter how good their training results are. He then orders them to stay back in the barracks, but Damien and Kyle refuse to back down. Damien promises to only serve as a porter from the rear as he reminds Taryn of their stamina and strength during the training earlier. Taryn considers this for a moment, but feels ashamed that the unit's current situation is making them rely on 2 rookies. Left with no choice, Taryn agrees to the request as he orders them to carry the reserve equipment and wait in the rear without participating in the actual fighting. On his way out, he orders Dianel to give the duo the spare equipment, but when it was time to hand it over, Dianel was a bit hesitant. Seeing the expression on Dianel's face, Damien recalls that this forest is the same place where something happened to Dianel in his previous life. Back then, Dianel informed Damien that there was a demon in the Bronzerian forest, but Damien didn't believe it. Dianel explained that it had to be a demon because it was no ordinary monster, and he saw it with his own eyes. It looked like a single demon orc crushing an iron wolf, but normally it would take 5 orcs to bring down 1 iron wolf. As Damien continues to think about Dianel's past life and why the Neocalites was disbanded, he feels a sharp ache in his head, making it hard for him to sort his memories. For some reason, everything was jumbled up together, so he decided to stop thinking about it and just wait till they got to the forest to see the situation with his own eyes. Once the team is gathered, Taron calls on them, asking whether everyone has their gear intact. Once they confirm it, he begins his short speech, advising the team to think things through before making any life and death decision. He also tells them to avoid anything dangerous and advises them to prioritize returning alive. After the speech, he then orders them to move out, and while leaving, Damien feels excited for his very first real battle since his rebirth. A few hours later, they arrive at the Bronzerian forest, and Taryn orders them to search the surrounding area. He tells them to move in teams of 3, and they're not allowed to stray out of sight. While the others break into teams, Taryn orders Damien and Kyle to stick with him. As they enter the restricted zone, the air around the forest suddenly changes. Damien notes that it looks like an ordinary forest, but feels like a battlefield. The moment he walked in, every cell in Damien's body was screaming at him that this was an extremely dangerous place. He could sense this thanks to the 5 years he spent on a battlefield in his previous life. A few minutes in, they hear a sudden shout from another team, and Taron turns in their direction, asking if they found something. As the soldiers call on him to check out what they found, Taron quickly hurries over to them, only to find a large clearing with corpses of the herb gatherers. Aaron wonders why there are still weapons lying around when the search party has already swept the place. Taryn explains that the search party must have left in a hurry after witnessing such a terrifying scene. Taryn then scans the nearby areas and notices several huge trees torn apart, making him wonder what type of monster could do that. Aaron guesses it might have been some kind of bear-type monster, but Taryn doesn't believe a bear-type monster can wreak this much havoc. Aaron wonders if it was an ogre, but Damien chimes in, telling them that it's definitely not an ogre, as he shows them the corpse of a red bear in front of him. Seeing the large claw marks on the bear, Damien agrees with Aaron that they may be dealing with a bear-type monster. From the spacing of the claws, he deduces that the monster must be enormous, and it's the only way to explain the several trees that were ripped apart. Taryn is impressed by Damien's analysis and his reasoning, so he asks where Damien learnt it from. Damien then explains that his father was a hunter, so even though he doesn't know much about forests, he picked up quite a bit about them from his hunter father. Taryn commends him for learning well, while Kyle stares at Damien in confusion, wondering when his father became a hunter. Kyle was just about to remind him that he previously said his father was a soldier when Damien shot him a stern glance, meaning he needed to shut his trap. Shortly after, Taryn tells the team to prepare to head back, and he orders them to gather the bodies since they have to return them to their families. Damien is impressed by Taryn's decision because he knows that forcing their way deeper into the forest is just a death sentence. Since they only found traces, the team needs to head back and strategize until they know what they're dealing with. Damien notes that this must be what Taryn is thinking about, so he silently commends him for being an outstanding commander. He also realizes that this must be why Dianel missed the commander in the previous life. Just as the team is about to leave, Damien suddenly senses something heading their way, so he quickly orders everyone to get down. Unfortunately, before they can react in time, a giant boulder comes flying out of nowhere, injuring several soldiers. Once the dust settles, some of them are trapped under the boulder, while the others who made it out unscathed wonder where the rock came from. Damien then calls on Kyle, and the duo immediately lifts the boulder, pinning the soldiers down. While some of them help Kyle and Damien to hold the giant rock in place, Taryn orders the rest to help the injured squad members. After pulling out the trapped soldiers, Taryn worries about their condition, but Damien pulls out an amancho herb, telling them to chew it. He explains that chewing it for as long as possible to draw the juice out should ease the pain a bit. However, Taryn stops him as he explains that eating the amancho herb directly is poisonous. But Damien tells him that eating it with the seeds from the Nemoja fruit will neutralize the poison. He then instructs Taryn to make the injured squad members chew on it while they're still conscious. As Tyrone watches the injured guys chew on the herb, he can't help but wonder how Damien knows so much. Damien then calls his attention, reminding him that they need to head back to camp immediately because whatever threw that rock at them is still out there. Unfortunately, before Damien can finish speaking, an enormous bear-type monster suddenly appears, leaving everyone terrified. The horrifying gigantic monster towers above the soldiers, making them wonder what the hell it is. None of them has ever seen a monster that big, leaving them wondering how a black bear managed to grow to such a terrifying size. Taryn then orders the team to prepare for combat, and everyone readies their weapons. But as the monster takes a swipe at them with its claws, the soldiers scramble to dodge the attack. Taryn then orders them to move the injured soldiers to the rear, while the others surround the monster from all sides. As he yells to the team to attack the monster by targeting its legs, Taryn calls the team's tank, Helson, to start. Helson confidently takes a swing at the monster's leg, but his axe barely leaves a scratch on the monster. Seeing Helson distracted, Taryn calls on him to focus, but before Helson can react in time, the monster attacks him. Once Helson is slammed to the ground, the monster prepares to finish him, but Taryn swoops in just in time to block the strike with his blade while someone pulls Helson out of the line of fire. At that point, Taryn notices that 3 of his soldiers are already badly injured, so he vows not to let the monster escape alive. He then orders the soldiers surrounding the monster to attack at the same time and stab at the monster until they pierce through its tough hide. Meanwhile, Aaron is busy keeping Damien and Kyle from getting dragged into the fight while Taryn calls on Dianel to make his move. Dianel immediately leaps forward and with a single powerful strike slices off one of the monster's paws. As the monster growls in pain, Taryn prepares to deal the finishing blow to end the monster. He then infuses his sword with mana while Damien watches in shock. After infusing the blade with mana, Taryn leaps forward and with a single strike, he instantly slays the beast. After the battle, the soldiers excitedly kick the beast, cursing it for attacking them. Meanwhile, Tyrone carefully checks the monster as he finds it hard to understand where such a creature originated from. As he lifts its fur to find several black spots on the monster's hide, Aaron suggests it could be contagious, explaining that such spots are seen on patients with infectious diseases. The soldiers immediately pull away from the monster when they hear this, except for Damien, who continues to study it closely. After staring at it for a while, Damien concludes that there's only one way such an abnormal monster can exist, so he makes up his mind to find where it originated from. Shortly after, Taryn orders Aaron to take some men and stand guard while another soldier named Brent skins the monster to use its hide for armor. However, Damien objects as he explains that the monster hide cannot be used for armor. Brent demands to know why, and Taryn also stares at Damien intently because, just as he thought, Damien knows more than he's letting on. He then orders everyone to abandon the monster hide and return to base, but tells Damien to follow him immediately. As soon as they arrive at the barracks, Taryn questions Damien privately about the black spots on the monster. Damien then reveals that the bear seems to have been poisoned by demonic energy. Taryn wonders if he means the dark energy used by black mages, and Damien confirms it. This makes Taryn wonder whether black mages are in the Bronzerian forest, but it is widely known that black magic is forbidden. Damien replies that he's not sure there are black mages in the forest, but there could be something imbued with demonic energy corrupting the monsters. Basically, demonic energy is a power borrowed from worshipping demons, and the only end for those exposed to this energy for a long time is a miserable death. Damien recalls that in his previous life, a magic stone imbued with demonic energy was discovered in the Bronzerian forest. Back then, this magic stone was made known to the world after an incident that shook the Empire. From the news articles back then, it was also the Neocolits unit that discovered the demon-corrupted monsters in the forest. After that, the Imperial Army formed an expeditionary force to subjugate the monsters. Damien realizes that this must have been when everything started. Speaking about demonic energy, it strengthens the body by poisoning more monsters as time passes, turning them into something terrifying. However, they can be destroyed before the power of the demonic energy grows. After listening to Damien's take on the forest incident, Taryn asks how he knows so much about the situation. Damien simply says he heard about it from his father, who apparently had a similar encounter with such monsters in the past. This piques Taryn's interest, so he asks Damien to tell him everything he knows about this so-called similar encounter. Even though he's not sure of what Damien is saying, Taryn chooses to listen to anything because at this point, they're just grasping at straws since this is a whole new situation. He listens attentively as Damien begins narrating the story about his imaginary hunter father's experience. The following day, the soldiers are groggy and tired after their near-death experience during yesterday's mission. Meanwhile, Kyle wakes up screaming when Damien calls his name to wake him up. Just then, one dude barges in to share some exciting news with them and reveals that the Bronzerian forest has been blocked. Apparently, starting today, no one is allowed inside, including herb gatherers and soldiers. So for the time being, the soldiers will only be training without any subjugation missions. Everyone is excited to hear this news because it would give the team time to recuperate, especially for the injured soldiers. While everyone is celebrating the good news, Kyle notices that Damien doesn't seem happy. However, Damien brushes him off and pretends he's happy about the good news. He knows that this is a good thing for the team since they need to rest, but for him, this is torture. He was already looking forward to looking into the source of the demonic energy while experiencing real combat, so this sudden ban doesn't please him at all. Soon afterward, they notice a bunch of heavy garrison soldiers marching into the barracks, making them wonder what they want. A few moments later, the garrison soldiers arrive at Taron's office, but Taron isn't too excited to see them. He demands to know what they want, and first, the captain thanks Taron for his report about the forest. The captain then reveals that the temple has agreed to cooperate with the investigation because they also felt an evil aura from the monster corpse. As soon as he hears this, Taron realizes that Damien was right, and this makes him wonder if the forest really has something to do with demonic energy. Since nothing is clear yet, the captain informs Taron that the temple has decided to dispatch a priest to conduct a joint search operation in the Bronzerian forest. The captain then suggests taking Damien since he knows about demonic energy, but Taron refuses. He explains that sending a rookie with no field experience is a bad idea, but the captain reminds him that Damien is the only one who knows about this and even discovered the whole thing in the first place. Taron wants to continue holding out, but he knows that refusing this proposal might get his unit penalized, so he has no choice but to comply. He then orders Aaron to go fetch Damien, who's still feeling like his life has suddenly turned bleak just because of the ban from entering the Bronzerian forest.